There are lines in manuscripts that have not been read aloud in centuries. I am going to read one of them tonight. My name does not matter here. What matters is what I am holding. A fragment Aramaic, written on parchment, copied by hand, sealed inside a clay jar, and left on a shelf of rock inside a cave in this cliff face. Sometime before the 1st century, it was not found until 1947. The text is called the Book of Giants, and most people have never heard of it, not because it is unimportant, because it was kept in a place most people were never taught to look. The Book of Giants belongs to the same world as the Book of Enoch, the same tradition, the same memory of a time before the flood. When something went wrong at a level the later world struggled to name cleanly, the Ethiopian Orthodox canon preserved the Book of Enoch in full. In Ge'ez, it was copied, chanted, carried forward, while almost every other branch of Christian memory set it aside. The Book of Giants was not preserved in the same complete form. What we have of it are fragments, Aramaic pieces, found among the Dead Sea Scrolls at Qumran, right here in this cliff. And inside those fragments, 2 dreams. Not the dreams of prophets, not the dreams of holy men receiving visions of mercy, the dreams of giants, the offspring of the Watchers, the beings the old tradition remembered as the children of heaven and earth, born from a union that was never supposed to happen. They dreamed, and what they dreamed was their own destruction. That is where we are tonight, Watcher, standing at the edge of that account, at the mouth of the cave where the record was kept, at the hour when the 2 dreams are about to be opened. The first dream belongs to a giant named Ohyah. The second belongs to his brother Hahyah. 2 brothers. 2 nights, 2 visions of the same ending, arriving through different images, from different angles, as though the judgment was so large, it had to come through more than one door to be believed. Neither of them understood what they had seen. That matters, because a being powerful enough to shake the earth dreamed of its own end and could not read the dream, could not interpret what its own sleeping mind had been shown. There is something in that I have carried a long time, the idea that a vision can arrive inside you, complete, precise, already true, and still be beyond your ability to understand, that the dream knows more than the dreamer, that judgment can announce itself through the very mind it is addressed to, and still not be heard correctly. Tonight we are going to follow both dreams carefully. We are going to stand inside the Aramaic account, read what the fragment actually preserves, and then follow the thread the way the tradition followed it, through the messenger sent to find Enoch, through the interpretation that came back, through the silence the giants kept after they finally understood what the trees and the swords had meant. But first, before the dreams, we need to stand inside the world that made the giants possible. We need to understand what the text says happened before the sleeping began, because the dreams did not arrive in a vacuum. They arrived at the end of something, at the edge of a world that had already gone as far wrong as a world can go. And to feel the weight of what Ohyah and Hahyah saw, You need to feel the weight of what they were. The cliff holds that story too. It is written on the same parchment, in the same careful hand that recorded the dreams. Come inside. The fragment begins before the dreams. It has to. Because a dream does not arrive without a history behind it. And the history behind these two dreams is one of the oldest, most carefully preserved accounts of disorder in the whole ancient world. Let me tell you what the text holds, not approximately, not in summary. What it actually says and where it comes from. The tradition begins in the book of Enoch, First Enoch, chapter 6. The watchers of heaven, beings assigned to observe, to guard, to remain in their station, looked down at the daughters of men, and they desired them. That word matters, desired, not casually. Not briefly, the text uses language that carries the weight of a decision made collectively. A covenant of transgression, a group of beings who looked at what was below them and chose, together, to cross the boundary between what they were and what they were not supposed to become. Their leader in the Enochic tradition is Shemihaza. 200 of them descended, according to the account, onto a mountain called Ardis, on the summit of Mount Hermon. The name Hermon itself, in the old tradition, carries the word for oath, herem, a binding, a consecration. But here the consecration moves in the wrong direction. They bound themselves, not to holiness, but to each other. In the act of descent, they took wives, and the women bore children. The children were not ordinary. The text is precise about this, in a way that modern readers sometimes try to soften, but the fragment does not soften. The offspring were giants. In the Aramaic tradition preserved at Qumran, they are called Nephilim, a word that carries the sense of the fallen, the cast down, those who came from a fall. In the wider Enochic tradition, the Ge'ez text of First Enoch names them Nephilim and gives their height as 3,000 ells, a number that is not meant to be measured with a tape. It is meant to be felt. These were beings whose very size was a statement about disorder, about what happens when the boundaries of creation are broken at the level of origin. And they were hungry. The text describes what followed with the kind of clinical precision that makes it more disturbing, not less. The giants consumed everything the human population could produce. Then they turned on the humans themselves, then on the animals. Then, when nothing remained that they had not already consumed, they turned on each other. Violence breeding violence, appetite consuming appetite. The old tradition remembers this as an escalation. Not a single catastrophic moment, but a slow widening of destruction, spreading outward in every direction, until the earth itself could not absorb what was happening on its surface. The Ge'ez text of First Enoch, preserved in full inside the Ethiopian Orthodox canon, says the earth cried out. That phrase carries more weight than it seems. In the ancient imagination, the earth is not a passive surface. It is a witness. It receives what falls on it. It registers what is done above it. And when the earth cries out in these accounts, it is not metaphor. It is testimony. The ground itself has become a record of what was done. Now hold that image and placed the Book of Giants alongside it. The Book of Giants enters this same world, but from a different angle. Where First Enoch watches the descent from above, the Book of Giants watches from inside. It gives the giants interiority. It gives them names. It gives them voices. It gives them dreams. The Aramaic fragments found here at Qumran, catalogued as 4Q 5 and 30 among others, preserve pieces of this account, not complete, broken at the edges, missing in places, the parchment, darkened and fragile after 2,000 years in a sealed jar on a stone shelf. But what remains is enough. Enough to hear that the giants were not simply forces of destruction moving through the world without awareness. Some of them knew something was wrong. Ohyah knew. Not through reasoning, not through scripture or prophecy. Through sleep, the dream came to him, and it came with the particular authority that certain dreams carry, the authority of something that does not feel invented, the authority of a thing that arrives already finished, already true, already containing its own meaning, even if the one who received it cannot yet read what it means. But before we enter the dream itself, there is one more thing the tradition preserves about the world these giants inhabited. One detail from the Enochic account that changes the emotional weight of everything that follows. The Watchers, the fathers of the giants, had also taught that is often forgotten. The transgression was not only physical, it was also intellectual. Shemihaza and his companions taught humanity things it was not supposed to know yet: metallurgy, the cutting of roots, enchantments, the knowledge of how to make weapons, how to make war, how to make beauty into manipulation. So the world before the flood was not only violent, it was educated in violence. It had been given tools it was not ready for, by beings who had crossed from a higher order into a lower one and dragged knowledge down with them when they fell. That is the world Ohyah and Hahyah were born into. That is the world they grew inside. That is the world whose air they breathed, whose violence they participated in, whose appetite they inherited from the moment of their origin. And then, in the middle of that world, they lay down and closed their eyes. And the dreams came. The wind moves through the cave mouth behind you. The parchment in the account is still. The fragment holds what it has always held: two brothers asleep in a world already standing at the edge of its own ending. Before the first dream opens, the fragment offers something, a word, a specific word, preserved in the Aramaic text that most people reading about giants in the modern world have never been given directly. Not a summary of the word itself. In the Aramaic fragments from Qumran, the giant offspring are referred to by a term that carries layers most translations flatten into a single English word and then move past. The term is Nephilim. Say it slowly. Nephilim. In Aramaic, this word carries the root naphal, to fall, to descend, to be cast down. But in the context of the Book of Giants, it carries something more precise than that. It is not only describing beings who fell from somewhere. It is describing beings who exist as the result of a fall. Beings whose very nature, whose origin, whose first breath was already the consequence of a boundary broken above them. They did not fall themselves. They were born from the falling of others. That distinction matters, because it changes how you hear everything that comes after. A being that chose to fall carries a different moral weight than a being that was born into the consequence of someone else's choice. The Nephilim did not decide to be what they were. They were made by a decision that was made before them, above them, without them, and yet the world they inhabited, the violence they participated in, the destruction they spread, was real, was consequential, was part of what caused the earth to cry out. This tension between origin and action, between inheritance and responsibility, is one of the things the Book of Giants preserves that the shorter Genesis account does not have room for. Genesis names the Nephilim once, in 2 sentences, and moves forward. The Book of Giants stays. It slows down. It asks what it was like to be inside that origin. Now here is where the Ethiopian thread becomes essential. The word in the Ge'ez tradition used in the Ethiopian Orthodox text of First Enoch is a transliteration that carries the same Aramaic root forward into the classical liturgical language of the Church. In Ge'ez, the Ethiopian scribes did not replace this word with a gentler term. They did not smooth it into something more comfortable. They kept the weight of it. They kept the sense of descent built into the syllables. And that choice, the choice to preserve the original gravity of a word, rather than translate it into something easier, is exactly what the Ethiopian manuscript tradition did with this entire body of literature. It kept what others set aside. It held what others decided was too strange, too difficult, too much. The Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo canon is the only Christian scriptural tradition in the world that preserved First Enoch as part of its complete biblical canon, not as a curiosity, not as an appendix, as scripture, as a text worthy of copying, chanting, studying, and handing down across more than 15 centuries of continuous use. And inside that canon, the Nephilim are not a footnote. They are part of the moral memory of why the flood came. Part of the explanation a tradition preserved, because it refused to let the story of the world before judgment become vague. The Ge'ez scribes who copied First Enoch knew what they were copying. They knew the Nephilim were the offspring of the Watchers. They knew the tradition that connected giant violence to the cry of the earth. They knew that the flood was not an arbitrary act, but an answer to a world that had been filled systematically with a kind of destruction that started in the heavens and ended in the soil. And they kept it on parchment, in lamplight, in monasteries on islands in Lake Tana, in highland scriptoria in Gondar, in rock-hewn chambers in Lalibela, where the ink dried slowly and the reed was set down carefully, and the next scribe picked it up and continued. That continuity is not decorative. It is why we can stand here tonight, at the mouth of this cave, holding a tradition that the wider world nearly lost, because one branch of Christianity refused to narrow its memory. Now, Watcher, pause here for a moment. Tell me in the comments. Did you know these texts existed before you found this channel? Did you know the Book of Giants had been preserved at Qumran? Did you know the Ethiopian Orthodox Bible kept First Enoch while almost every other tradition set it aside? Or did this place show you something that had been hidden from you? I read every answer, and if tonight has opened something in you, the Ethiopian Orthodox Bible is linked in the description below. The complete canon, the one that never removed what others chose to leave out. First Enoch is inside it. The tradition we are reading from tonight lives inside it in full. It will be there when you are ready. Now, back to what we can see, because the word Nephilim is not only a linguistic detail, it is a door. And once you walk through it, the two dreams that are coming carry a different weight. Because if the giants were born from a fall, then the dreams that came to them in the night were not visiting strangers. They were the logic of their own origin. Arriving finally, in a form their sleeping minds could receive, the fall that made them had always known where it was going. The dreams were just the moment. The end of that trajectory became visible. Ohyah did not know this yet. He was asleep, and in the darkness behind his closed eyes, something was growing. Something shaped like a garden. Something shaped like two trees. Something shaped like the end of a world. The fragment preserves what he saw. And we are about to enter it. There is a particular kind of silence that comes after destruction, not the silence of peace. Not the silence of a thing that has never been disturbed. The silence of a place that has been torn through and is now simply resting between one act of violence and the next. That is the silence of the world Ohyah and Hahyah slept inside. Picture it carefully. Not the way a painting pictures it, with dramatic light and obvious scale. Picture it the way the fragment pictures it. From the inside, from ground level, from the place where two enormous beings lay down on the earth at the end of a day and closed their eyes. The landscape around them would have been wide. Open highland, most likely, in the tradition's geography. Somewhere in the region, the old texts place the activity of the Watchers and their offspring. The kind of terrain where a human settlement would have looked small, temporary, already half consumed. The trees here were old. Not the cultivated trees of a garden. Wild trees, deep-rooted, the kind that had been growing since before the Watchers descended. Their roots went down into soil that had not yet been saturated with the blood the text says was coming. Their branches spread without knowing what moved beneath them. The sky at night in this world would have been clear, not the haze of a populated age, not the diffused glow of a civilization burning fuel across 1,000 cities. Clean dark, the way night was in the ancient world. Stars so dense across the sky that the darkness between them almost seemed incidental. Ohyah would have seen that sky before he closed his eyes. Hahyah, too. Two brothers lying on the earth, under a sky that had no idea what was being decided above it, in the heavens that the Watchers had already left behind. The ground beneath them was cold by now, the day's heat already given back to the air. Stone, exposed in places where the soil had thinned. the particular coldness of earth at night that arrives slowly from below, moving upward through whatever is resting on the surface. Around them, the world was not entirely still. It never was in this tradition. The text preserves the sense of a world in constant motion, not the gentle motion of ordinary life, but the restless motion of a civilization that had been educated in appetite and had not yet been given any reason to stop. Somewhere in the distance, the sounds of that world would have continued through the night. Not close, not immediate, but present, the way violence is present, even when it is not directly in front of you, as an atmosphere, as a quality of the air that tells you this is not a safe world, even in the hours when nothing is actively happening. But here, in the specific place where the two brothers lay, there was a pause, not peace, a pause. The kind of quiet that settles around exhaustion, the kind of stillness that comes not from harmony, but from the simple fact that even the largest, most violent things eventually require sleep. The Nephilim were enormous. The tradition is consistent about this. Their size was not incidental. It was part of what made them what they were. Part of the statement their existence made about the scale of the disorder that produced them. And enormous things, when they sleep deeply, the breath of them would have been slow, heavy, the kind of breathing that moves the air around it, that makes the nearby grass press flat, and then rise again with each exhale. The kind of breathing that sounds, from a distance, like something much larger than a single living thing, like the earth itself. Breathing, Ohyah's eyes were closed. Hahyah's eyes were closed. The world around them continued its slow, terrible motion. The stars moved in their courses above the cold stone. The old trees held their roots in soil that had not yet answered for what walked above it. And then, in the deepest part of the night, the dream came to Ohyah. Not gently. The fragment does not preserve it as gentle. It arrived the way certain truths arrive, fully formed, already in progress, as though it had been traveling toward him for a long time. And the sleep was simply the door it had been waiting for, a garden. That was the first image, not a battlefield, not a ruined landscape, not a sky full of descending fire. A garden, green and still, and ordered in the way that only cultivated things are ordered. The kind of place that exists because someone decided it should exist, tended it, shaped it, kept it separate from the wildness pressing in around it, and, inside the garden, trees, two of them, standing near each other, rooted in the same ground. Their branches touching at the top, where the canopy of each had grown into the canopy of the other, until it was difficult to tell, from a distance, where one ended and the other began. Ohyah saw this, still asleep, still breathing those slow, heavy breaths that moved the air around his enormous body. He saw the garden, he saw the two trees, and then he saw what was coming toward them. The fragment holds what came next. But before we enter it, let the silence of this moment remain for just a breath longer, because this is the last moment before the dream becomes clear. The last moment before the first tree falls. the last moment in which Ohyah's sleeping mind still holds the image of something whole, something standing, something that has not yet been touched by what is moving toward it. The garden is still green. The trees are still rooted. The branches are still touching at the top. And in a world outside the dream, two brothers lie on cold ground beneath a sky full of stars, breathing slowly, not yet knowing that the night is about to show them something that neither of them will be able to forget. The garden in the dream is not vague. That is the first thing to understand about it. Dreams in the ancient tradition are not the soft, dissolving things that modern people sometimes imagine when they hear the word. They are not impressions. They are not impressions. They are not moods given temporary shape. In the Enochic world, in the tradition that produced the Book of Giants and preserved it at Qumran, a dream given to someone at a moment of cosmic significance is precise. It has edges. It has specific images that mean specific things. It arrives with the clarity of a document, not the blur of an ordinary night. So, when Ohyah dreams of a garden, he does not dream of a vague green space. He dreams of a particular garden, bounded, known, a place that feels even inside the dream like it has existed for a long time, like it was planted with intention, like whatever grows inside it was placed there deliberately by someone who understood what they were doing. The two trees stand at the center of it, not at the edges, not incidental to the landscape, at the center, where the eye goes first, where the meaning of the whole space seems to gather and rest. They are tall, the kind of tall that takes generations to achieve, roots that go down as far as the branches go up. A canopy wide enough that the ground beneath them has never seen direct sun. Only the filtered, broken light that comes through old leaves in the middle of the day. The bark on both trees is dark textured, the kind of surface that carries the record of every season it has survived, every drought, every storm, every year of growth that added one more ring to the body of the thing. Ohyah, in the dream, knows these trees, not the way you know something you have studied, the way you know something that has always been part of the landscape of your world, the way a person knows the oldest tree on a road they have walked since childhood, not consciously, but in the body, in the part of the mind that registers permanence without being asked to. These trees are permanent, or they were, until the dream showed him what was coming. The figures arrive from the edge of the garden. The fragment is careful here. It does not describe them in the way the giants would have described human beings, as small, as manageable, as things that could be consumed or dismissed. These figures carry a different quality. They move with authority, not the authority of size, not the authority of violence for its own sake. The authority of something that has been sent, the authority of an action that has already been decided, somewhere above the garden, before the dream began. And these figures are simply the mechanism by which that decision arrives on the ground. There are more than two of them. The tradition does not give a precise number in the surviving fragment, but the sense of the account is of a company, a coordinated arrival, beings moving together toward a single purpose with the quiet efficiency of those who know exactly what they have come to do. They carry instruments. The fragment uses imagery that the Aramaic preserves with particular weight, tools of cutting, not weapons of war in the conventional sense, not swords raised in anger, but instruments of deliberate removal, the kind used when something is being taken down, not in the heat of conflict, but in the cold clarity of a decision already made. Ohyah watches this in the dream, still asleep, still lying on the cold ground outside the dream, in the world where his brother breathes nearby, and the stars continue their courses above the wild trees, and the soil has not yet given back what was put into it. But inside the dream, he is present, watching, unable to move in the way that dreams sometimes make the body unable to move, not paralyzed by fear exactly, but held by the particular stillness of a witness who understands, somewhere beneath conscious thought, that what is happening in front of them is not something they are supposed to stop. The figures reach the first tree. They do not circle it. They do not examine it. They move directly to it. The way you move to something when you already know everything about it that matters. When the examination was done long before you arrived, and what remains is only the act itself, the first strike lands. The sound of it fills the dream. Not a sound of metal on wood exactly. Something deeper than that. Something that seems to travel up through the ground as much as through the air. A vibration that Ohyah feels in his chest before he hears it with whatever passes for ears in the space of the dream. The tree shudders, not the way a tree shudders in wind. Flexing, recovering, returning to upright. The shudder of something receiving a wound it will not recover from. A deep internal movement, root to crown, the whole length of the thing responding to what just happened to its base. The second strike, the third, each one finding the same place, each one going deeper, each one making the vibration in Ohyah's chest heavier, lower, more final, and then the roots. This is the detail the fragment preserves most carefully. The roots, before the tree falls, before the crown comes down, before the canopy that took generations to spread across the sky of this garden finally surrenders its height, the roots are exposed. The earth around the base of the tree opens, not violently, with the same cold deliberateness that has governed everything the figures have done since they arrived. The soil parts, the roots appear, pale, complex, the underground architecture of a thing that was built to last, now visible for the first time in the light of the dream, and they are torn. Not cut cleanly, torn. The word the tradition uses carries the sense of something being separated from what it was connected to, not at a single point, but along the entire length of the connection, the whole system of roots, the whole underground reason this tree was standing, separated from the ground that had been holding it. Ohyah sees this, and something in him understands, before the tree has even begun to fall, that this is not something that can be undone. A cut can heal, a wound can close, but a root torn from the ground, That is a different kind of ending. The tree leans, slowly at first, the way enormous things lean, with a dignity in the slowness that makes it worse to watch, not better. The canopy beginning to tilt. The branches that had touched the sky for generations now describing a new arc, downward, toward the garden floor. And then, the fall. The sound of it fills every corner of the dream. Not just the garden, the whole interior space of the vision. The sound of something that was permanent becoming in a single long moment of descent. Past. The first tree is down. Its crown rests on the garden floor. Its roots point upward, pale against the dream sky, holding the shape of what they were connected to, but connected no longer. Ohyah is still watching. And the figures have not stopped. They are already turning, with the same hurried, authorized efficiency, toward the second tree, the one still standing, the one whose branches are still touching the sky, the one whose roots are still in the ground, the second tree. Which means the dream is not finished. The figures turn toward the second tree, and Ohyah, still inside the dream, watches them turn. There is a moment, a specific moment, that the tradition seems to understand, even in its fragmented form. Between the fall of the first tree and the approach toward the second, where the dream holds, where nothing moves, where the fallen crown rests on the garden floor and the exposed roots point at the sky, and the figures stand between what is already down and what is still standing. That pause is not accidental. Dreams given with this kind of precision in this tradition do not waste their images. Every element carries weight. Every pause carries meaning. And this pause, this held moment between one ending and the next, is the moment in which the dreamer is given the chance to understand what he is seeing. Ohyah does not understand it. Not yet. But the dream gives him the pause anyway, because the dream is not cruel. It is precise. And precision sometimes looks like mercy, even when what it is showing you is the end of everything you are. The figures move toward the second tree with the same unhurried authority, the same coordinated deliberateness, the same quality of beings who have been sent and who will finish what they were sent to do, regardless of what the watching dreamer feels about it. The second tree is the same height as the first, the same depth of root, the same spread of canopy, the same dark, textured bark carrying the record of every season it survived. If anything, the second tree is slightly older. The tradition does not say this directly, but the sense of the account suggests it. The second tree has been standing longer. Its roots go down further. Its canopy has had more time to reach, which means its fall, when it comes, will be heavier. The figures reach it, the instruments are raised, the first strike lands, and again Ohyah feels it in his chest before he hears it. That deep vibration traveling upward through the dream ground, through whatever the ground of vision is made of. The second, third strike, the tree shuddering, the roots beginning to loosen their grip on the soil, and then something different happens. The fragment here is one of the most important surviving details in the entire Book of Giants account. before the second tree falls, before the roots are fully torn, one root is left, not torn, not exposed, left deliberately, with the same deliberateness that has governed every action of the figures since they arrived in this garden. They tear the tree from the ground. They bring the crown down. They do to the second tree everything they did to the first. But one root, a single root, remains connected to the earth. The tree falls. The sound fills the dream again. The canopy descends. The crown meets the garden floor. But one root, pale and intact, still reaches down into the soil, still connected, still holding, however tenuously, to the ground it grew from. Ohyah sees this, and something shifts in the dream. Not the images, the weight of the images. Because a root left in the ground, in the symbolic language of this tradition, is not a small detail. It is not the figures forgetting to finish the job. It is not an accident of the dream's imagery. It is the most important thing in the vision. The Enochic tradition, the wider body of literature that the Book of Giants belongs to, uses the image of a root with great care. In First Enoch, preserved in full in the Ge'ez text of the Ethiopian Orthodox canon, the language of roots and trees appears in the context of what survives judgment, what remains after the flood, what is kept when everything else is taken down. A root left in the ground is not merely a remnant, it is a promise, or more precisely, it is the record of a decision made before the cutting began, that something would continue, that the destruction, however complete it seemed, however total the fall of the trees, was not the destruction of everything. One line would survive, one root would remain in the ground, one thread of continuation would be preserved through the judgment. Not because the judgment was incomplete, but because the judgment was purposeful. And purposeful judgment in this tradition always preserves something. The fragment places this surviving root inside Ohyah's dream, which means it places the promise of survival inside. The vision given to one of the giants. Think about that carefully. Ohyah is not a figure of righteousness in this account. He is not a prophet. He is not one of the preserved. He is one of the Nephilim, the offspring of the transgression, the beings whose existence was part of what made the earth cry out. And yet the dream given to him contains the image of the surviving root. The interpretation of this detail in the wider Enochic framework is that the two trees represent the watchers and their offspring, and the figures with the cutting instruments represent the coming judgment. The fall of the trees is the destruction of the giant world, but the surviving root in the tradition's reading points toward what the flood would not remove. The human line that would continue through Noah, the thread of creation that was being preserved even as the judgment descended. The surviving root is Noah. Or, more precisely, the surviving root is what Noah represented. The part of creation that the judgment was designed to protect by removing what had made it unbearable. So Ohyah's dream contains, inside the same vision that showed him his own destruction, the image of the thing that would outlast him, the thing that would continue after he was gone, the root that would grow again, the thread that would carry forward into a world he would never see. That is not a small mercy, even given to a giant, even given to a being whose existence was the consequence of transgression. The dream did not only show him the judgment, it showed him the reason for the judgment. It showed him that the destruction was not the end of the story, only the end of his part in it. Whether Ohyah understood this is another question. The fragment suggests he did not immediately, not on his own. He woke from the dream carrying its images, the garden, the two trees, the figures, the fall, the surviving root. But without the framework to read them, without the key that would unlock what each image meant and what it was saying about the world he was living inside, he woke, and the dream sat in him like a stone heavy, unread, carrying the whole weight of a truth he had been given, but not yet given the means to understand. And the fragment records what he did next. He turned to his brother, because Hahyah had been asleep too. And when two beings share the same origin, the same blood, the same world, sometimes the night gives the same message through different doors, not identical, not the same images, but the same truth arriving through a different shape. The way two different translations of the same ancient text can use entirely different words and still be saying the same thing. Hahyah had dreamed too. And his dream had not been gentle either. He woke before the light was fully up. That detail is not in the fragment directly, but the tradition around it suggests it, because dreams of this kind, dreams given with this weight, do not release the dreamer slowly. They do not dissolve at the edges as the morning comes, the way ordinary dreams dissolve, leaving only a feeling and a color and a sense of something that was almost a story. These dreams stay. They are present when the eyes open. They are present in the chest, before the body has fully remembered where it is. They are present in the hands, which grip slightly harder than they should, as though the body is trying to hold on to something the mind cannot name. Ohyah opened his eyes to the pre-flood world. Cold stone beneath him, the sky not yet bright. That particular pale gray that arrives before color returns to the landscape before the light has decided what kind of day it intends to be. The wild trees on the plain were still dark shapes. The ground around him carried the moisture of the night. The air moved slightly, not wind exactly, just the slow breath of a landscape adjusting from one temperature to another as the dark gave way to the early gray. Nothing in the physical world had changed. Everything in Ohyah felt different. He lay still for a moment, not resting, not sleeping, simply still. The way a person is still when they are trying to hold on to something that is beginning to shift. When they are pressing the images of a dream against the inside of their mind, trying to keep them from becoming unclear before the world outside has given them any help in reading them. The garden, the two trees, the figures arriving. The first strike, the roots exposed, the fall. The sound of it, the way the crown met the ground with a weight that filled every part of the dream space. The second tree, The same arrival, the same authority, the same instruments raised. And then, the root, the single root left in the ground, still connected, still reaching down into the soil while the crown rested on the garden floor above it. All of it still present, all of it still clear, and none of it readable. That is the particular suffering of a vision given before its interpretation. It is not like ignorance. Ignorance is the absence of information. This was different. This was the presence of information, fully formed, fully detailed, fully specific, and the complete absence of the framework needed to understand what the information meant, like holding a letter written in a language you have never learned. The letters are clear. The hand that wrote them was careful. The message is complete, but it will not open for you. Not because it is locked, because you do not yet have the key. Ohyah sat up on the cold ground, the plain around him extended in every direction. The scattered evidence of the world he and his kind had moved through, not described in detail in the fragment, but present in the background of everything the tradition records about the pre-flood landscape, the world that had been made unbearable, the world that the earth was already crying out about, the world that Ohyah had lived inside for as long as he had existed, and that the dream seemed to be saying was not going to continue. He turned to his brother. Hahyah was already awake. That detail carries weight, because it means the night had not released Hahyah gently either. It means the dreaming had moved in him the same way, surfacing into waking without the gradual dissolution of ordinary sleep, leaving him present and upright and already carrying something, before the sky had finished deciding whether this would be a bright day or a gray one. The two brothers looked at each other. The fragment does not give us the exact words of this moment. What it preserves is the fact of the exchange, the fact that they spoke, the fact that what passed between them was the recognition that they had both been inside something during the night that neither of them had a name for. That recognition between them, two enormous beings sitting on cold ground in the gray pre-dawn of a condemned world, looking at each other across the shared weight of visions they could not read, is one of the quietly devastating moments in the whole Book of Giants account. Not because it is dramatic, because it is human. Or rather, because it is the thing in them that was closest to human, the capacity to be undone by a dream. The capacity to feel the weight of something you cannot explain. The capacity to turn to the person nearest to you, not because they have the answer, but because carrying something unreadable alone is harder than carrying it in company. Ohyah told Hahyah what he had seen: the garden, the two trees, the figures with instruments, the fall of the first, the fall of the second, the root left in the ground. He gave it to his brother as carefully as he could, the way you give a fragile thing to someone else's hands, knowing the image is precise, knowing the details matter, knowing that if you summarize it, if you flatten it into a shorter version of itself, you will lose something that the dream specifically preserved. Hahyah listened. And then Hahyah told Ohyah what he had dreamed: a different garden, different figures, different instruments, but the same destination. The same sense of authority descending from somewhere above the landscape of the dream, the same sense of something being removed that had stood for a long time, the same sense of a world being unmade, not in anger, not in chaos, but in the cold, ordered way of a decision being executed. When Hahyah finished, the two brothers sat in silence, not the silence of people who have nothing to say, the silence of people who have too much to say, and none of it useful, because what they are facing is beyond the vocabulary of their world, the pre-flood world, for all its violence and appetite and educated destruction, had not given the Nephilim any language for this. They had language for power. They had language for hunger. They had language for the taking of things and the breaking of things, and the moving through the world as though it existed to receive their weight. But they had no language for what the dreams were saying, no framework for a vision of judgment, arriving not as an enemy to be fought, but as a decision already made, already in progress, already expressing itself through the very architecture of sleep. The only being who might have such a framework, the only figure in their world whose connection to the higher order had survived the descent, was Enoch, the man who walked with God. The man the tradition remembered as having been taken, removed from the ordinary course of life, given access to the upper chambers of understanding that the watchers had abandoned when they chose to descend. Enoch could read what neither of them could read. But Enoch was not here. Enoch was somewhere the giant world did not easily reach, somewhere that required a messenger, a crossing, a deliberate act of seeking out the one person in the known world who might be able to say what the trees meant and what the root that remained in the ground was trying to tell them. That crossing would require a messenger, and the tradition knew exactly which one to send. But before that journey begins, the fragment offers a pause. Not the pause of the account resting, the pause of the record itself, a gap in the manuscript, a place where something was written that is no longer there, where the parchment holds an absence that carries its own weight. We are going to stand inside that absence for just a moment before the account continues. Here, the record stops. Not because the parchment was damaged at this point, not because the jar that held it was broken, or the cave flooded, or the scroll was torn by the same hands that eventually sealed it inside the clay. The damage in this fragment is elsewhere. There are places where the Aramaic is genuinely lost, where the surface of the parchment has gone, where the centuries took what they took and left gaps that no scholarship can fill. This is not one of those places. This is a different kind of absence, a place in the account where the scribe who was copying this text stopped. We do not know why. That is the truth of it, and I am not going to pretend otherwise. The manuscript tradition around the Book of Giants is fragmentary enough that the reasons for its gaps are not always recoverable. What scholars can say, and What the careful reader of the surviving fragments can feel is that there are places in this account where the transition between one section and the next is not smooth, where something was written and then something was not written. And then the account continues as though the missing piece was already understood, as though the scribe assumed the reader already knew what belonged in the gap, or, and this is the possibility that has stayed with me the longest, as though the scribe reached a particular point in the account and found that he did not have the words to continue immediately, not because the story was unclear, because some things, when you are copying them carefully in a dim room, with a reed in your hand, and the weight of what you are transcribing pressing through the instrument onto the parchment, require a pause, a moment in which the hand stops. The reed rests on the edge of the inkwell, the eye remains on the text being copied, but the hand does not move. I have sat with this gap for a long time. I am not going to fill it. What I will say is this. The account on one side of the gap gives us two brothers, sitting in silence, carrying visions they cannot read. The account on the other side of the gap gives us a messenger, already moving. What happened between those two moments? What was said? What was decided? What the silence between the brothers eventually produced is in the gap, and the gap holds it still. That is where we leave it. Not because the gap is unimportant, because what is preserved on either side of it is enough to continue. The account resumes. The messenger is already moving. Where Ohyah's dream gave him symbols, Hahyah's dream gave him something closer to sight. That is the distinction the tradition seems to preserve between the two visions. Ohyah saw a garden. He saw trees. He saw figures with instruments arriving to cut what was rooted. The imagery was real, precise, heavy with meaning, but it was still imagery. Still one step removed from the thing it was describing, still speaking in the language of symbol rather than the language of direct witness. Hahyah's dream did not offer that distance. There was no garden in his vision, no cultivated space with boundaries and order, and the implied presence of someone who had tended it. There was open ground, wide, exposed, the kind of landscape that offers nothing to stand behind and nothing to stand under, a plain that extends in every direction without apology, without shelter, without the mercy of enclosure, the kind of ground that makes whatever stands on it visible, completely, from every angle, with nowhere to go and nothing to become other than exactly what you are. Hahyah stood on that ground in the dream, and he was himself, not a tree, not a symbol standing in for what he was, himself in his full form, the enormous, rooted in violence, born from transgression form that the world had shaped him into from the moment of his origin. He stood on the open ground, and he looked up. The figures were already coming. Not from the edge of the landscape, the way the figures in Ohyah's dream arrived from the edge of the garden, from above, descending. From a place in the dream sky that Hahyah could not locate precisely, a height that the eye followed upward and then lost, a source that the dream did not reveal, and did not need to reveal, because the authority of where they were coming from was already present in the quality of their descent. They moved downward the way judgment moves, not falling, not dropping, descending, with intention, with direction, with the particular quality of something that has been aimed and will arrive where it has been aimed, regardless of what is waiting on the ground below. They carried swords. The fragment uses this image with care, not tools of cutting, as in Ohyah's dream, not instruments of removal applied to roots and trunks. Swords, the weapon that speaks directly to the body, that requires no translation, that carries its meaning without metaphor. A sword descending toward you in a dream is not the image of a thing being removed from the landscape. It is the image of you being removed from the landscape. Hahyah understood this in the way that dreamers understand things. Not through reasoning, but through the body's response to what the dream is showing it. The cold that moved through him when the figures appeared above. The particular stillness that comes not from peace, but from the recognition that what is approaching is beyond your ability to resist. The sense, arriving before conscious thought, that the open ground beneath his feet was not a neutral surface. It was where he was going to end up. The figures descended toward him, not rushed, not frantic with the energy of battle, moving with the same unhurried authority that had governed the figures in his brother's dream, the authority of something that has been given a task, and for whom the completion of that task is not in question, only the timing. Hahyah tried to move. The dream would not let him, not in the way of fear exactly, not the paralysis of a nightmare where the body forgets how to respond to what the mind is screaming at it to do. Something different, something more deliberate. The stillness of a witness, the particular holding of a dreamer who is being shown something that requires stillness to be seen properly. As though the dream itself understood that if Hahyah ran, if the dream allowed him to turn and put distance between himself and the descending figures, he would not see what the dream needed him to see. He would see pursuit. He would see flight. He would see a chase across an open plain that ended with the same outcome either way. But he would not see the thing the dream was actually showing him, which was not a battle, which was a decision. The figures reached him. And what happened next in the dream is preserved in the fragment with a specificity that scholars of the Aramaic text have noted carefully. The swords did not fall in rage. They did not slash or hack or tear in the way weapons move when the one wielding them is consumed by violence for its own sake. They fell in the same way the instruments had fallen in Ohyah's dream. With purpose, with the cold efficiency of a task being completed, with the quality of an action that had been decided long before it was being executed, in a chamber of judgment somewhere above the dream sky, in a place that neither Hahyah nor any of his kind had ever been permitted to stand. The earth received what fell. That phrase, "the earth received," is the one I return to most in this section of the account, because it carries the same weight as the tradition's description of the earth crying out. The earth that cried out under the violence of the Nephilim, the earth that became saturated with blood, the earth that testified against what was being done on its surface, is the same earth that received what fell in Hahyah's dream. And receiving, in this tradition, is not passive. The earth does not simply accept what lands on it the way a floor accepts what is dropped. It witnesses, it registers. It holds the record of what was given to it. So, when the dream showed the earth receiving the giants, it was showing Hahyah that the very ground his kind had been walking on, the ground that had been crying out under them, was also the ground that would receive them, that the testimony and the burial would happen in the same place. That, what the earth had been witnessing, it would also be given to keep. Hahyah lay on that ground in the dream, and the figures were still. Their descent was finished. Their task was complete. The open plain extended in every direction around the dream, unchanged, as though the landscape itself had not noticed what had just happened to what stood inside it, as though the plain had simply received one more thing and continued being a plain. And Hahyah, inside the dream, on the ground, felt something he could not name. Not pain exactly, not fear, something quieter than both. The particular stillness of a being that has been shown its own ending and has not been given permission to look away. He woke with that stillness inside him, still carrying it when he opened his eyes to the cold gray pre-dawn, still carrying it when he turned and saw his brother already awake, already sitting up, already holding his own unreadable vision in the same wordless way. Two brothers, two dreams, two different images, one garden with trees being cut, one plain with figures descending, one dream that spoke in symbol, one dream that spoke in sight, and both of them saying the same thing, arriving at the same destination through different landscapes, the way two rivers, starting from different places in the highlands, both end at the same sea. Neither of them could read it, but the account could. And the account knew exactly who needed to be found. They sat with it for a long time. The fragment does not give us a duration. It does not say how many hours passed between Hahyah finishing the account of his dream and the moment the decision was made to seek interpretation. But the tradition suggests it was not quick. These were not beings accustomed to uncertainty. The Nephilim, as the account preserves them, moved through the world with the particular confidence of things that have never had a reason to doubt their own power. They were enormous. They were the product of a union between heaven and earth. They carried in their bodies the strength of both the order they came from and the world they had been born into. Uncertainty was not a familiar condition. And yet here they were, two of the most powerful beings in the pre-flood world, sitting on cold ground in the gray early morning, carrying visions they could not open, unable to do with their minds what they could do with their bodies, unable to force understanding the way they could force almost everything else. The dreams would not yield to pressure. That is one of the things the account seems to understand about the nature of the visions given to them. They were not puzzles that could be solved by effort. They were not riddles that rewarded cleverness. They were messages addressed to specific recipients, written in a language that required a specific reader. And that reader was not either of the brothers. Ohyah went over the images again. The garden, the two trees, the figures arriving from the edge, the instruments raised, the first tree falling, roots exposed, crown on the ground, the second tree falling, the single root left connected to the soil. He laid them out carefully, the way you lay out the pieces of something you are trying to assemble, placing each one where it can be seen, hoping that the arrangement will eventually suggest the shape of the whole, but the shape would not come. Each image was clear in itself. Each detail was precise. The garden was a garden, the trees were trees, the figures were figures, the root was a root. But the meaning that should have risen from the combination of these things, the interpretation that should have formed the way a sentence forms from individual words, remained out of reach. Hahyah tried the same, the open plain, the figures descending from above, the swords, the earth, receiving, the stillness after. Each image present, each detail intact, the whole of it refusing to become a sentence. They compared what was the same. Both dreams contained figures arriving with authority. Both dreams contained an act of bringing down. Both dreams contained a sense of completion, of a task being finished rather than a battle being won, of purpose rather than passion governing what the figures did. That commonality meant something. It meant the two visions were not coincidental. It meant the night had not simply given two troubled minds two separate anxieties. It meant they had been shown, from two different angles, the same thing. And they compared what was different. Ohyah's dream had trees. Hahyah's dream had figures that looked like the giants themselves. Ohyah's dream spoke in symbol. Hahyah's dream spoke in sight. Ohyah's dream ended with a surviving root. Hahyah's dream ended with the earth receiving what fell, still carrying the Aramaic letters pressed into the parchment by the hand of the scribe who copied them, still preserving the account of the two dreams, still holding the line of fear that the giants felt when Enoch's interpretation finally reached them, intact. The scroll dust that comes from handling these fragments is real. Scholars who have worked with the Qumran materials describe it, the particular fine dust that rises from ancient parchment when it is moved, the residue of 2,000 years of slow, imperceptible deterioration held in suspension by the sealed jar, released when the seal is finally broken. Scromon dust. The physical evidence of how long the written thing waited in the dark, of how much time passed between the hand that pressed the letters into the parchment and the hand that first touched the parchment again. There is something I find almost unbearable about that dust. Not in a morbid sense, in the sense of scale. The sense of what it means for something written to wait that long to be read. The Aramaic letters were pressed into that parchment in a room by a scribe. By lamplight, in a community that believed what they were preserving was worth the clay and the linen and the careful placement on the stone shelf. And then silence. 2,000 years of silence. While the tradition that made the Book of Giants intelligible survived in Ge'ez, in the Ethiopian highlands, in the monastery libraries on the islands of Lake Tana, and in the rock-hewn churches of Lalibela. The fragments that belonged to the same tradition sat sealed in their jars above the Dead Sea. The two threads of the same tradition, the Aramaic fragments at Qumran and the Ge'ez preservation of First Enoch in Ethiopia, separated for 2,000 years, and then, in 1947, beginning to find each other again. The jars opened, the fragments studied. The Enochic tradition that Ethiopia had kept alive used to illuminate what the fragments contained. The fragments used to deepen what the Ethiopian tradition had preserved. Two threads, two forms of the same preservation, one in clay, in the dark, in a desert cave, one in ink, in lamplight, in a highland monastery, both holding, across different distances and different silences, the same account: the watchers and their offspring. The violence that filled the earth, the judgment that came, the two dreams that announced it, the fear that arrived when the dreams were finally read. The night is coming to this cliff now. You can feel it in the way the light at the cave mouth has changed. The pale gray of the desert sky outside has deepened. The stone walls of the cave interior have lost their last trace of reflected daylight. The darkness inside has become the same darkness that held the jars for 2,000 years, not threatening, not empty, the darkness of a kept thing. The darkness of a space that has learned across a very long time how to hold what is placed inside it. The account is not finished yet. There is still the question of what the two dreams mean together, as a unit, beyond the individual interpretations of each image. There is still the question of why two different visions were given to two different beings on the same night. There is still the question of what the tradition, preserved in Ge'ez and in Aramaic, and in the long faithfulness of two very different kinds of keeping, wants us to understand about the relationship between the dreamer and the dream, between the one who receives a vision of judgment and the judgment itself. That is what comes next, before the cliff grows completely dark, before the scene dissolves into the particular stillness that this place holds at the end of a long day. Two dreams given to two brothers on the same night, in the same world, from the same source, arriving through different images, through different landscapes, through the particular shapes that a vision takes when it is addressed to a specific mind, when it is tailored to the interior architecture of the one receiving it, and carrying together something that neither dream carried alone. That is the first thing the tradition seems to want us to understand about why there were two dreams and not one. One dream was not enough. Not because the truth being delivered was too large for a single vision to contain, although there is something to that, but because the two brothers were not the same. Ohyah and Hahyah were born from the same origin. They inhabited the same world. They participated in the same violence. They sat on the same cold ground at the end of the night, but they were not identical. And the vision that reached Ohyah through the particular shape of his interior life was not the same shape that would reach Hahyah most directly. Ohyah's mind received symbol. The garden, the trees, the figures with instruments, the organized imagery of a cultivated space being unmade. The kind of vision that asks the dreamer to think, to interpret, to work with the relationship between image and meaning. Hahyah's mind received sight. The open plain, the figures descending, the swords, the earth receiving, the kind of vision that does not ask for interpretation so much as presence. The kind that puts you inside the event rather than outside it, looking at symbols of it. Two different approaches to the same truth, and together they form something complete. The symbolic dream and the direct dream. The vision that shows the event through metaphor, and the vision that shows the event through witness, the garden and the plain, the instruments and the swords. The roots exposed and the earth receiving. Together they give the full dimensionality of what was coming. The structural truth. This is what is being removed and why. And the experiential truth. This is what it will feel like from the inside. One dream explains, the other shows. And the tradition that preserved them understood that both were necessary. That explanation without experience remains abstract. That experience without explanation remains incomprehensible. That the giants needed both, even if receiving both still left them unable to read either one alone. Now hold the two dreams together and look at what they share, not the images. The quality underneath the images. Both dreams carry the same fundamental characteristic, and it is the characteristic that the tradition seems most interested in preserving. In both dreams, the figures arrive with authority, not power exactly. Authority, the distinction matters. Power is what the giants had. They had more of it than almost anything else in their world. Enormous, educated in destruction, born from a union between heaven and earth, possessing a strength that the human world around them could not match. They understood power. They had spent their entire existence moving through a world that deferred to their power. But the figures in both dreams did not carry power in that sense. They carried authority. The authority of something that has been sent. The authority of an action that originates in a place where power is not the relevant category. Where the relevant category is decision. A decision made in the chambers that Enoch had been shown. A decision that did not require the consent of the ones it was addressed to. A decision that was not in negotiation with the giant's power, because it operated on a different plane entirely. Power can resist power. Power can meet power and push back and sometimes prevail. Authority of the kind the figures carried cannot be resisted by power. It can only be received, and this is what the two dreams together reveal. More clearly than either dream reveals alone, the judgment that was coming was not a battle. It was not the kind of ending that the giant's world was familiar with. The collision of forces the larger consuming the smaller, the stronger outlasting the weaker. It was an execution of a decision already made, a completion of a process already in motion, a bringing to its natural conclusion of a sequence that had begun the moment the watchers chose to descend. The giants could not fight it, not because they were too weak, although the flood would make the question of physical strength entirely irrelevant, but because there was nothing to fight against. You cannot fight a decision that operates on a different plane than the one you exist on. You cannot resist authority by deploying power. You can only receive it or fail to receive it, and the outcome is the same either way. The two dreams together show this. In Ohyah's dream, the figures are not challenged. In Hahyah's dream, Hahyah cannot move, not paralyzed by fear in the conventional sense. Held by the recognition that what the dream is showing him is not something his movement would change. The stillness in both dreams is not weakness. It is the correct response to a truth that does not require your cooperation to be true. Now, look at what the two dreams together say about the giants themselves. Because this is the aspect of the account the Enochic tradition, preserved in GEs, carried forward by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church across 15 centuries, seems most interested in. The giants were given the dreams. That fact, held carefully, is extraordinary. The beings being judged were given advance knowledge of the judgment, not after the fact, before, while the world was still continuing, while the flood was still preparation rather than event, while there was still time, in the physical sense, between the dreaming and the ending. Why? The tradition does not answer this directly in the surviving fragments. It preserves the fact without explaining it. But the wider Enochic framework, the theological world that the Book of Giants was written inside, suggests an answer, because the God of the Enochic tradition does not act in the dark, not in the sense of secrecy, not in the sense of a judgment that arrives without announcement, without any form of witness having been given first. The watchers were warned before they descended in the tradition. Noah was warned before the flood. The giants were given dreams before the judgment came. Announcement precedes execution. Witness is given before reckoning. This is not mercy in the sense of offering an escape route. The dreams did not contain instructions for how to avoid the judgment. Enoch's interpretation did not end with, "And here is what you must do to prevent this," but it is a form of dignity. The dignity of being told, of being treated as beings capable of receiving the truth about what is coming, of being given the announcement rather than simply experiencing the event without context. The dreams were the announcement, and the tradition preserved them because it understood that announcement matters, that a God who announces judgment before executing it is different from a God who simply acts. That the act of giving the giants dreams, sending them a messenger, providing them with interpretation through Enoch, was itself a form of the same faithfulness that sent Noah the instructions for the ark. Different recipients, different outcomes, but the same quality of a creator who does not act without first making the action known to those it addresses. That theological weight is what the Ethiopian tradition preserved when it kept First Enoch inside its canon. Not merely the fascinating details of the Watchers and the Nephilim and the pre-flood world, the vision of a God whose judgments are announced, whose decisions are delivered through dreams and messengers and interpretations, whose reckoning arrives into understanding rather than into ignorance, and the two dreams of Ohyah and Hahyah, preserved in Aramaic at Qumran and illuminated by the Ge'ez tradition that kept their context alive, are the most vivid surviving example of that announcement. Two beings told what was coming before it came, given the truth before the event, given the fear that comes from understanding before the event that would justify the fear. There is one more thing the two dreams together reveal: the surviving root. In Ohyah's dream, one root remains in the ground after the second tree falls. In Hahyah's dream, there is no equivalent image the earth receives. The figures complete their task. The dream ends with stillness. The surviving root appears only in Ohyah's vision, which means it was given specifically to him. The brother whose dream spoke in symbol, whose mind received the metaphorical version of the truth, was also the brother given the image of continuation, not given to Hahyah, whose dream spoke in direct sight. That asymmetry is deliberate, the tradition seems to suggest, because the surviving root is not comfort. It is context. It is the image that places the judgment inside its larger purpose. That shows the cutting down as part of something that includes preservation. That reveals the destruction as the form the protection took. And that kind of context, the context that holds destruction and preservation in the same image, requires the distance of symbol to be received. Direct sight shows what is happening to you. Zumbul shows what is happening around you. Ohyah was given the symbol because he needed to see the larger frame, whether he was able to receive what the surviving root was saying, whether the context reached him along with the fear. The fragment does not tell us. But the tradition preserved the image, and the tradition preserved it here, in this cave, in this jar, in this fragment of Aramaic parchment, because it understood that the image needed to arrive eventually in a mind that could hold both things at once, the judgment and the preservation, the cutting down and the surviving root, the fear that arrives with understanding, and the context that places the fear inside a purpose larger than the fear itself. The cliff outside the cave is fully dark now. The sky at the cave mouth has gone from gray to deep blue to the particular darkness that carries stars. The Dead Sea below is no longer visible, only audible, that low, patient presence of water that has been carrying the landscape since the beginning of this account. The fragment in the account is still. The account has reached the place it was always moving toward, not an ending exactly. The place where the explaining stops and the remaining begins. The scene is about to dissolve, not because it is finished. Because this is the hour when the cliff becomes something other than a lecture hall. when the cave becomes what it always was, before the account and after it. A kept place, a still place, a darkness that has learned how to hold things for a very long time, without disturbing them, without asking them to be anything other than what they are. The dreams have been read, the interpretation has been given, the fear has been named, the tradition that kept all of it has been honored. And now, the cliff simply is as it has been for 2,000 years, and the night is coming in off the water. The scroll is rolled closed, not dramatically, not with the finality of a door being slammed, the way a scroll is always rolled closed, carefully, with attention to the edges, with the particular slowness of hands that understand what they are handling. The reed that was used to copy it has been set down. It rests on the edge of whatever surface it was set down on, still carrying a trace of ink at its tip, the ink already drying, already becoming the permanent record of a hand that will not pick up this reed again tonight. The jar is sealed, the stopper fitted into the narrow neck, pressed into place with the same deliberateness that governed everything in this cave, the same deliberateness that governed the dreams, the messenger, the interpretation, the fear. Everything in this account has moved with that quality, purpose without hurry, intention without performance. The particular pace of something that knows it has time, because what it is doing is meant to last. The jar is sealed, and the darkness settles around it. Not new darkness. The same darkness that has been here since before the jar was placed on the shelf. The same darkness that will be here long after this night. Simply settling, the way darkness settles when the last light in a room has gone out. Not rushing in, not filling a vacuum dramatically. Just becoming what it always was when nothing was interrupting it. The cave exhales, or something that feels like exhaling. A slight shift in the air pressure. A settling of the stone around the space it has been holding. The cliff face outside is still. The wind that has been coming up off the water all night has gone quieter, not absent. Quieter, the kind of quiet that wind achieves in the deepest part of the night, when even the moving air seems to have decided that this hour requires something less than its full voice. The Dead Sea below is no longer asking for attention. It is simply there, as it has always been there. As it will continue to be there long after this night has passed into the same silence that holds the 2,000 years before it. Off-dant. Salt, and still and lower than anything else on the surface of the earth, holding its shape in the dark the way the cave holds its shape, the way the cliff holds its shape, the way stone holds things, without effort, without consciousness of holding, simply by being what it is. The account has ended. Not the night, the account. Everything that needed to be given has been given. The two dreams have been opened. The trees have fallen. The root has been identified. The messenger has crossed and returned. The interpretation has been delivered. The fear has been named. The tradition that kept all of it has been honored. The jars that held it have been described. The darkness that preserved it has been acknowledged. There is nothing more the account needs to say. What remains now is not content. What remains is the place itself. The cliff, the cave, the dark inside the cave, the water far below, the stars above the cliff face, visible now from the cave mouth, not many, not demanding, simply present in the way that stars are present when the night has reached its depth. You do not need to hold any of what was given tonight, not the names, not the images, not the sequence of the account. You do not need to keep anything in place. The jar is sealed. The fragment is inside. The darkness around it is the same darkness it has been resting in for 2,000 years. It does not need you to remember it for it to be true. It was true before tonight. It will be true after tonight. The cliff held it without you. It will continue to hold it without you. What you were given tonight was simply the opening of a seal. A brief illumination of something that exists whether or not the light is on it. And now the seal is closed again, and the darkness returns to what it knows how to do. Keep, just keep, without strain, without vigilance, without the effort of someone trying to hold a thing that might slip away, the way stone keeps, the way a sealed jar keeps, the way a cave keeps the thing placed inside it, not by gripping, not by watching, simply by being the shape around it. The witness voice is slowing now, not disappearing, slowing, becoming quieter than the wind off the water, quieter than the stone settling in the dark, quieter than the stars that have no voice at all, and yet are more present than almost anything else in this night sky. There are no more fragments to open, no more names to give you, no more images to place in your hands, no more forward pulls, no more next sections, no more account pressing toward its next moment. Only the cliff, only the cave, only the dark inside the cave that has been keeping things for longer than memory reaches, and will continue keeping them. Long after this voice has gone quiet, long after this night has passed, long after the last trace of the account has dissolved into the same stillness that holds everything else in this place, the scene is not ending. The scene is returning to what it was before the account began, to the cliff, to the cave, to the wind off the water, to the patience of stone, to the darkness that keeps without being asked to. And you are still inside it, not as a student at the end of a lesson, not as a listener at the end of a talk, as someone standing in a kept place, at the end of the night, with the weight of an old account settling slowly into the body, the way warmth settles into stone. Not quickly, not dramatically. From the inside outward, slowly, through the long patience of a material that was built to hold heat without showing it. The scroll is closed, the jar is sealed, the reed is set down. And the cliff continues, as it has always continued, holding what was placed inside it, watching over the deep water below, receiving the night without resistance. Let the scene take over now. Let the account step back, the way the witness steps back, the way a hand steps back from a jar it has just sealed. Not because the work was unimportant, but because the work is done, and what follows the work is rest. The cliff face at this hour is a particular color, not the pale bone white it carries in full daylight, when the sun is directly on it and the limestone reflects back everything given to it. Bright, almost harsh, the color of a surface that has nothing to hide and nowhere to soften. At this hour, the color has changed. The last light is leaving the stone from the top down. The upper face of the cliff, where the rock meets the open sky, still holds a trace of the day, a warm gray, almost gold in certain places where the angle of the light catches the texture of the limestone and holds it for one more moment before releasing it. But lower on the face, where the cave mouth opens, where the shelf inside holds the sealed jars, the color has already gone, already become the particular blue-gray of stone at night. Not dark yet, not the full dark that comes later, the in-between color. The color stone becomes when the day has left it, but the night has not yet fully arrived. A color that has no good name in most languages. The color of a thing in transition, of a surface that is neither what it was an hour ago, nor what it will be an hour from now. Simply becoming, slowly, without drama. The way most important transitions happen, not in a moment, not with a clear line between before and after, but in a gradual deepening that you only recognize as having happened. When you look up and realize the light is different from when you last noticed it. Run a hand along the cliff face here, not the inner wall of the cave, the outer face, the surface that has been receiving the day's heat since sunrise and is now, hour by hour, releasing it back into the night air. The stone is warm, not hot, not the surface level warmth of rock that has been sitting in direct sun. The deeper warmth, the warmth that lives 3 or 4 fingers below the surface, stored there through the long, patient hours of the day, now radiating outward through the limestone in a slow, continuous release that will last through most of the night. That warmth is one of the oldest things you can feel in this landscape. Not the warmth of something burning, the warmth of something that simply received the light long enough for the light to become part of it and is now in the dark, giving it back. The texture of the cliff face under the hand is not smooth. It is layered. The limestone here has been building itself for a very long time. Layer upon layer of compressed material, the remains of ancient sea life, the accumulated record of a body of water that once covered this landscape, pressing itself flat over millions of years into the pale rock that now holds the cave and the shelf and the sealed jars and the darkness inside. You can feel the layers, not stone lines in the rock where one era ended and another began. Edges that have been softened by exposure but not erased. A record of time that makes the 2,000 years of the sealed jars feel almost recent, almost manageable. The scale of the cliff makes the scale of the account smaller, not in the sense of less important, but in the sense of held, contained within something much larger. The way the cave contains the jars, the way the cliff contains the cave, the way the landscape contains the cliff, everything nested inside something wider, everything kept by something older. Below, the Dead Sea. You cannot see it clearly now. The light that was reflecting off the surface earlier in the evening that flat silver shimmer that identifies salt water from a distance, has gone with the last of the daylight. What remains is the presence of it, the knowledge carried in the air, in the particular weight of the atmosphere at this elevation above that particular body of water, that there is something down there, something patient, something that has been sitting in its basin since before the accounts were written and the jars were sealed, and the community placed the scrolls on the stone shelf and walked away. The smell of it reaches up the cliff face in a slow, continuous drift, salt, mineral, the particular smell of water that has nowhere to go, that cannot drain anywhere lower, that simply sits and concentrates, becoming more of what it is with every year that the sun evaporates its surface and the springs at its edges replenish what was lost. The most concentrated thing in the landscape, poppet tard, in the way that only things with nowhere to go are patient, not resigned, not trapped. Simply, exactly where they are, there is scroll dust on the hands. That detail is real in the account, not literal for this night, but real in the tradition of what it means to have been close to these fragments. The scholars who first handled the Qumran materials describe it. The fine dust that rises from ancient parchment, the residue of 2,000 years of slow, imperceptible change, held in suspension by the sealed clay, released into the air when the seal is broken. It settles on the hands, on the wrists, on the edges of the fingers. It is not dirt. It is the physical evidence of time, the proof carried on the skin that what you touched was not recently made, that what you held was old in a way that most things in the modern world are not old, old in the way that changes the quality of your attention, the way that makes the hands move more slowly, the way that produces the particular care that ancient things seem to require simply by being what they are. Let that dust remain on the hands for a moment. Do not brush it away. It is the last physical trace of the account, the last connection between what was given tonight and the material world that held it for 2,000 years before tonight arrived. The cliff is cooling now, degree by degree, the stored warmth releasing from the surface outward, the stone returning to the temperature of the night around it, giving back the day slowly, the way all slow good things are given, without announcement, without insisting on being noticed. The cave mouth is a darker shape in the cliff face, not threatening, not empty. The particular darkness of a kept place, the darkness that has been doing its work since the jars were sealed, the darkness that holds without effort, that keeps without vigilance, that simply remains around what is placed inside it. Faithful in the way that stone is faithful, not by choosing to be, by being unable to be otherwise. Let the body feel the cliff now, not the account, not the names, not the sequence of the two dreams and the messenger and the interpretation, the cliff itself, the warmth in the stone, the layers of compressed time under the palm, the smell of salt rising from the water below, the darkness deepening from the bottom of the cliff face upward, the stars beginning to appear above the rim of the rock, one, then two, then the sky deciding that the light has gone enough, that the dark is established enough, that the stars may emerge. They do not rush. They have been there the whole time, simply waiting for the light to go far enough away, for them to be seen. Let the body become the cliff for a little while. Not metaphorically, in the sense that the cliff demonstrates, warm from what it received during the day, slowly releasing that warmth into the night, laid with the record of long time pressed into it, holding a kept darkness inside it without effort, facing the patient water below without needing to respond to it, simply present, simply here, in the particular hour when the account has ended, and what remains is the place the account was always set inside, the cliff, the cave, the dark, the water, and the stars, arriving one by one, without announcement, into a sky that was always going to be there when the light finished leaving. Come inside, not further inside, just to the threshold, the place where the cave begins, where the outer face of the cliff gives way to the interior, where the temperature changes by 2 degrees in the space of a single step, where the air stops moving the way it moves outside and becomes something else, still. Not the stillness of something that has been made still, the stillness of something that has never been disturbed enough to learn what disturbance feels like. The inner air of this cave has not been moving, not tonight, not last night, not for a very long time. It sits here the way water sits at the bottom of a deep vessel, not because something is holding it down, but because there is no reason for it to be anywhere else. It has found its place, and it remains in its place with the patience of something that has no argument with where it is. The stone of the cave walls is cold now, not the cold of winter, not the aggressive cold that asks the body to respond, to tighten, to generate more of what it is losing. The mild cold of a place insulated from the day. A cave at this depth in this cliff does not receive the sun's warmth directly. The outer face absorbs and releases. The inner chambers remain, through summer and winter both, at a temperature that the desert world outside cycles past twice a year, once on the way up in spring, once on the way down in autumn. A stable cold, the cold of something unchanged, of a space that has maintained its temperature through the long, indifferent patience of rock and depth and the absence of whatever would cause variation. It is the same temperature it was when the jars were placed here, the same temperature the scroll dust settled at, the same temperature the linen wrapping rested in, the same temperature that held the Aramaic letters on the parchment surface through 2,000 years of waiting. Let the body feel that cold now, not as discomfort, as contact, the particular contact of a surface that has not been warmed by recent presence. That meets the skin with its own unmodified temperature, honest, unchanged, offering exactly what it is without adjustment. The cold of the cave wall against the hand is the cold of 2,000 years, not metaphorically. The stone has been this temperature for that long. The air has been this still for that long. The darkness behind the threshold has been this complete for that long. And touching it touching the wall here, is touching the same surface that the hands of the Qumran community touched when they placed the jars on the shelf. When they pressed the stoppers into the jar necks, when they turned and walked toward the cave mouth, when they stepped back out into the daylight and left the interior to the dark. That continuity is in the stone, not dramatically, not as a mystical presence asking to be acknowledged, simply as a fact of material. The stone does not distinguish between the hands that touched it then and the hands that touch it now. It is the same stone, at the threshold, looking outward. The cave mouth frames a rectangle of sky, not large. The opening is not generous with its view. It gives you exactly as much sky as the cliff face allows. A narrow vertical shape of deepening blue, bordered on both sides by pale limestone, open at the top where the rock ends and the night begins. The last amber has left that rectangle. It was there an hour ago, a trace of warmth at the upper edge of the opening, the final remnant of the day's color, held in the sky above the cliff for longer than the lower horizon holds it, the way color always lingers longest at the top of things. It is gone now. The rectangle of sky at the cave mouth is blue, deep blue, the particular blue that is one step away from black, that carries the last memory of daylight in its tone without actually containing any light. A color that is almost night, almost, but not entirely. The almost matters because this is the hour the cave has been waiting for, not the full dark, the almost. The threshold moment when the sky outside the cave mouth is deep enough to stop drawing the eye outward. When the pull of the visible world beyond the cliff face has diminished to the point where it is no longer competing with the interior. When the cave becomes the primary reality instead of the frame around a view, the jars are on the shelf behind you, in the deeper dark. Not visible from the threshold, not needing to be visible. Their presence is in the air of the cave, in the particular quality of a space that has been holding the same things for a very long time, in the subtle difference between the air of an empty cave and the air of a cave that contains what this one contains. A difference too small to name precisely, too real to dismiss. The sealed jars, the linen-wrapped scrolls inside them, the Aramaic letters on the parchment, the two dreams, rolled closed, resting in the dark, Ohyah's garden, sealed inside clay, Hahyah's plain, sealed beside it, the surviving root, the figures with swords, the fear that arrived with understanding, all of it rolled and wrapped and placed and sealed and left in this cold, in this still air, in this darkness that has been keeping what was given to it since before the 1st century. It does not need to be opened to be real. The account has already been opened tonight. The seal has already been broken. The dreams have already been read. What is in the jars now is the record of what was given, returned to keeping, returned to the cold and the dark and the still air, to rest again. Until the next opening, whenever that is, by whoever arrives at this threshold next, stand here for a moment longer. At the edge between the cave's interior and the cliff face outside, the cold stone on the left, the cold stone on the right, the cold stone underfoot, the still air around the body, and ahead, the rectangle of almost night sky. One star is visible in it now, just one. Appearing in the upper right corner of the frame, the cave mouth makes, where the rock ends and the open sky begins, not announced. Not arriving with any particular ceremony, simply there, the way it was always going to be there once the light had gone far enough. Present, in the way that things are present when nothing is competing with their presence. The star does not illuminate the cave. It does not reach the threshold. It does not touch the cold stone walls or the still air or the darkness behind where the jars rest on their shelf. It simply exists in the rectangle of sky, at a distance too large to imagine, carrying its light across a space that makes the Dead Sea below, and the cliff face and the 2,000 years of the sealed jars. Feel close, manageable, human in scale. Look at the star for a moment, not to study it, not to name it or locate it in a constellation, or calculate how long its light has been traveling. Simply to notice it, to receive the small fact of its presence in the upper corner of the cave mouth's frame, the way the cave receives what is placed inside it, without effort, without reaching, simply by being the shape that is open toward it. The body is cooler now than it was at the threshold, not cold, cooler. The cave's temperature having moved into the skin slowly, the way all slow good things move, without announcing themselves. Be being near long enough for the contact to become the temperature. Let that continue. The cave will not take more than it takes. It will not cool the body past what the body can rest in. It has been holding things at this temperature for 2,000 years without damaging them. It knows how to hold without harming. It knows how to keep without consuming. The rectangle of sky at the cave mouth is deeper now. The one star has been joined by another, then a third, appearing in the sequence they always appear in. The brighter ones first, the quieter ones after. The whole population of the night sky arriving in the order that the deepening dark makes them visible, not according to their distance or their size or their significance, but according to how much light they carry and how much of the competing light has gone, and whether the hour has grown quiet enough for them to be seen. The cave is quiet enough. The night is quiet enough. The body at the threshold is quiet enough. 3 stars in the rectangle, then 4. The cave does not count them. The cave simply remains what it is, open at one end toward the sky, closed at the other end around the dark and the cold and the sealed jars on the stone shelf, holding both the outside and the inside in its single shape, neither reaching toward the stars nor turning away from them. Simply present, simply the cave, simply here, as it has always been here, and the body at the threshold, cooler now, stiller now, its eyes no longer moving across the rectangle of sky but resting in it, is beginning to hold itself the same way, not by effort, by contact, by being near the cave long enough, and still enough, and open enough for the cave's way of being to become, slowly, the body's way of being too, still, cold in the best sense, held, open at one end toward the stars, keeping something sealed and safe in the dark at the other. The rectangle of sky continues to deepen. The stars continue to arrive, and the cave continues, as it has always continued, receiving the night without resistance, holding what was placed inside it without strain, meaning exactly what it is in exactly the place it has always been, on the cliff face above the patient water, under the stars that have been arriving in this same sky, in this same order, since before the jars were sealed, since before the community walked away from the threshold, since before the account was written down, since before the dreams were dreamed. The water is below. You cannot see it. The dark is complete enough now that the cliff face ends somewhere beneath you, and the Dead Sea begins somewhere further down, and there is no visible line between them. No edge, no horizon, no surface catching the starlight in a way the eye can follow down to it. Only the knowledge that it is there, and the sound of it. Not waves. The Dead Sea does not make waves the way open water makes waves. It is too heavy for that, too dense, too concentrated in its own nature to move with the casual ease of lighter water. What it makes instead is something quieter, a presence of sound rather than a pattern of sound, a low, continuous registering of water against the base of the cliffs far below, a sound that is more felt than heard, more received in the chest than processed by the ears. The kind of sound that you stop noticing as a sound at some point and begin noticing as a condition, as the baseline of this place. The thing that is always happening here, beneath every other thing that happens here, beneath the account and the fragment and the dreams and the interpretation and the fear and the sealed jars and the scroll dust and all of it. This sound was already present. It was present when the community sealed the jars and walked away. It was present through the 2,000 years of darkness inside the cave. It was present tonight when the account began, and the wind came off the water, and the cliff face was pale in the darkness, and the cave mouth opened in the rock. And it is present now, when the account is over, when the voice is nearly gone, when what remains is only the place. Let the sound be the primary thing now. Not the words, not the images, not the sequence of the account moving from one section to the next. Just the sound of the water far below the cliff. Low, pat, continuous. The kind of sound that the body recognizes without being taught to recognize it. Something about the frequency of it. Something about the rhythm of it, which is not a rhythm exactly, because rhythm implies pattern, implies repetition with variation, implies a sequence that the ear can follow and predict. This is different. This is more constant than rhythm. The sound of something that is not moving toward anything, not coming from anywhere, not building toward a conclusion or releasing from a held tension, simply continuous. Simply the ongoing fact of water existing at the lowest point on the surface of the earth. The wind comes across the cliff face, not strong, not the wind of a storm or a pressure system moving through, the wind of this place at this hour. The particular movement of air that happens when the cliff face has released enough of its stored heat that the temperature differential between the rock and the open air above the water creates a slow pull, a gentle draft moving up the cliff face from the water below, carrying the salt smell with it, the mineral smell. The particular atmosphere of the Dead Sea rising slowly up the pale limestone toward the cave and the shelf and the sealed jars and the stars above. It touches the face. Not cold enough to make the body contract, not warm enough to feel like comfort exactly. The neutral temperature of a place that has found its equilibrium for this hour, that has balanced itself between the stored warmth of the stone and the cooler air of the open desert night. Balanced, not dramatic, not asking for attention. Simply balanced. The way this whole landscape is balanced, between the depth of the water below and the height of the cliff above it, between the keeping darkness of the cave interior and the open star-filled sky at the cave mouth, between the 2,000 years of sealed silence and the account that opened the seal tonight, everything held in a balance that does not require anyone to maintain it, that maintains itself. Let the wind touch the face and pass. Let it carry its salt and its mineral and its trace of the deep patient water far below. Let it move across the cliff face in its slow, continuous draft, the way it moves every night at this hour, the way it moved the night the jars were sealed, the way it has been moving across this rock for longer than the account remembers. And let it pass without holding it, without needing it to stay. The stars above the cliff are fully established now. Not the sparse first arrivals of an hour ago, the full population of the night sky, the ones that require complete dark to be seen, the ones that were always there but needed the last traces of competing light to go before they could show themselves. They are showing themselves now, not to be noticed. They do not require noticing. They have been there every night of the 2,000 years the jars were sealed, every night of the account being held in darkness, every night of the account being given, and the interpretation arriving, and the fear settling into the brothers on the cold ground of the pre-flood world. They were there for all of it. Indifferent in the way that stars are indifferent, which is not the indifference of coldness or cruelty, but the indifference of scale, of existing at a distance so large that the events below, however significant, however weighted with the gravity of judgment and preservation, and the kept record of an ancient account, are simply part of the landscape they have always looked down into, part of the place, part of the night, part of the continuous present of a universe that does not distinguish between the sealing of the jars and tonight, between Ohyah's dream and this hour, between the fear that seized the giants and the settling of the body at the threshold of a cave above the Dead Sea. All of it part of the same place, all of it held by the same dark. The sound of the water continues. It will continue after this voice stops. It will continue through the night and into the morning and into every morning that follows. The same low, patient presence, the same baseline of this place, the same thing that was always happening beneath everything else that was happening here. Let it be the thing the ear rests on now, not actively listening, not following the sound the way you follow a voice that is trying to tell you something, retting on it, the way the cliff rests on the ground below it, the way the cave rests inside the cliff, the way the jars rest on the stone shelf, without effort, without grip, simply in contact with what is supporting them, trusting the support without needing to verify it continuously. The body can do this too. Ret on the sound of the water, the way the cliff rests on the ground, not listening. Resting, the difference is in the effort. Listening requires something from you. Resting requires only that you stop requiring something from yourself. The wind comes again. Salt, stone, the trace of deep cold water rising from far below, and passes. The stars hold their places. The cave holds its jars. The cliff holds the cave. The night holds the cliff. And beneath all of it, patient, continuous, lower than everything else on the surface of the earth, the Dead Sea holds its basin. Its sound rising slowly up the pale rock toward wherever the body is resting, toward the face that the wind is touching, toward the hands that still carry faintly the last trace of scroll dust from the account. There is nothing more to follow, no next moment in the account, no next image to receive, no forward pull carrying the attention toward what comes next. Only the water and the wind and the cliff and the stars. And the dark inside the cave where the sealed jars rest on the stone shelf, holding the two dreams in their rolled and wrapped and clay-sealed form, exactly as they have always held them, exactly as they will continue to hold them, after the voice stops, after the account is gone, after the body has followed the sound of the water down into the same deep patience that the cliff face demonstrates, that the cave demonstrates, that the sealed jars on the stone shelf demonstrate. The patience of a kept thing, the patience of something that does not need the account to continue in order to continue. The water below, just the water, its sound rising, continuous, pot, low. The way sleep rises from somewhere below the surface of thought, from somewhere the account cannot reach, from the same place the water comes from, patient and low and continuous, not asking, not requiring, simply present, simply real, simply the thing that has been happening beneath everything else all along, waiting the way the water has always been waiting, for the moment when everything above it grows still enough to feel it. The cliff is still, the cave is still, the stars are still, the wind has passed, and the sound of the water, low, continuous, patient, rises. I am done speaking, not because the place has nothing left in it, not because the account has exhausted what this cliff holds, or what the cave holds, or what the sealed jars on the stone shelf hold in their linen-wrapped, clay-sealed, 2,000-year-old darkness. There is more here than any account can carry. There is always more here than any account can carry. That is the nature of a kept place. It holds more than it gives. It gives what the night requires, what the listener can receive, what the hour has room for. and keeps the rest. The rest remains in the cave, in the dark, in the cold, in the still air that has not been disturbed since the jars were placed on the shelf. It will be there next time, and the time after that, and for as long as the cliff holds the cave, and the cave holds the dark, and the dark holds what was placed inside it. I am done speaking. The scene is not. The scene continues. Right now, in the dark behind these words, the cliff face is still there. The cave mouth is still open in the rock. The stone shelf is still holding the sealed jars. The Aramaic letters are still pressed into the parchment inside them. The two dreams are still rolled inside the linen wrapping, inside the clay. Ohyah's garden, the two trees, the figures arriving, the surviving root, Hahyah's plain. The figures descending the swords, the earth receiving, all of it still there, sealed, kept in the same cold, in the same dark, in the same still air that held it through 2,000 years before tonight, and will hold it through whatever comes after tonight. The Dead Sea is still below. Its sound is still rising, low, patient, continuous, the baseline of this place, the thing that was always happening beneath the account, and is still happening now that the account has ended. The wind will come across the cliff face again, in its slow draft from the water below, carrying salt and mineral and the particular cold of a desert night above the lowest water on earth. The stars are still in the sky above the cave mouth, the same stars that were there when the jars were sealed, the same stars that were there through the 2,000 years of darkness. The same stars that were there tonight when the account opened and the wind came off the water, and the first sound of this place arrived before any voice. They do not require the voice to continue. They continue on their own, the way the cliff continues, the way the cave continues, the way the water continues. Without the account, without the voice, without anything being required of the place by the listener, or of the listener by the place. Only the permission, quietly extended, to remain here as long as you need. There is no hurry to leave this place. There is no other place you are required to be before morning. The cliff will hold you here, in the way it holds everything here, without effort, without asking anything in return, simply by being the shape around you. The cold of the cave wall is still available to the hand. The sound of the water is still available to the ear. The stars are still available to the eye. If the eye is still open, if the eye has not yet followed the sound of the water down into the same depth the sound comes from, and if it has, that is correct too. The place does not require your eyes to remain. It remains whether you are watching it or not. That has always been the nature of kept places. They do not perform for the visitor. They do not arrange themselves differently because someone is present. They are exactly what they are. Whether the cave mouth frames a pair of open eyes or a pair of closed ones, whether the listener is still following the account, or has already gone somewhere the account cannot follow, somewhere the voice cannot reach, somewhere below the words, below the sound of the water, below the cold of the stone, below the scroll dust and the sealed jars, and the two dreams rolled inside their linen wrapping, somewhere the cliff knows about, that the cave knows about, that the Dead Sea has known about since before the account was written, the place where kept things rest, where sealed things remain, where the darkness is not absence, but the particular fullness of a space that has been holding something for a very long time, and knows how to continue holding it without light, without warmth, without sound, without anything except the patience of stone, and its own deep, continuous, unchanging, dark. I am leaving this place now, not because the place asks me to leave, because the place does not need me to remain. It was here before I arrived. It will be here after. The cliff will hold its cave. The cave will hold its dark. The dark will hold its jars. The jars will hold their dreams. And the dreams will hold, as they have always held, the two brothers, the garden, the plain, the figures, the root, the fear, the interpretation, the messenger crossing the deep, the water rising from below the cliff, all of it sealed, all of it kept, all of it resting in the cold and the still and the dark, exactly as it was placed. I am done speaking. The scene is not. It continues in the dark behind these words. Stay as long as you need. The cliff will hold you. The cave will keep you. And the water below, patient, low, continuous, will carry whatever remains of the account down into itself, the way it carries everything that reaches it. Without judgment, without record, without distinguishing between the sealed thing and the thing that was never sealed, between the ancient and the recent, between the kept and the given, all of it received, all of it held, all of it, in the end, simply here, as you are here, as the cliff is here, as the dark is here, as the water is here, low, patient, continuous, below, ret now. The differences mattered too, because if the two dreams were saying the same thing from different angles, then the differences between them were not contradictions. They were dimensions. Each vision carrying one part of the truth that the other did not carry. Together, if you could read them together, they might form something complete, but neither of them could read either one, let alone both. And this is where the tradition introduces one of its most quietly significant details. The giants, for all the knowledge the Watchers had brought down with them, for all the metallurgy and enchantment, and the cutting of roots, and the understanding of weapons and beauty and manipulation that had been taught to the human world, did not possess the knowledge of how to read a vision given from above. That knowledge had not been part of the descent. It belonged to a different order. The order the Watchers had left behind when they chose to come down. The order that Enoch still had access to. Enoch, the seventh from Adam in the tradition. The one who walked with God and was taken. The one who, in the Ethiopian Orthodox canon, stands as the receiver and transmitter of heavenly knowledge. The one whose book the Ge'ez scribes copied and chanted and preserved across 15 centuries, because they understood that what it contained was not ordinary, was the only figure in the known world who could move between these orders, who could take what had been given from above and translate it into something a being below could understand. Enoch was the reader the dreams required. The tradition records that the giants knew this. Not immediately, not in the first hours of sitting with the unreadable visions, but eventually. As the morning continued and the images refused to yield, and the weight of carrying something you cannot understand grew heavier with each passing hour, the conclusion formed: there was only one place to take this, only one figure who could be asked. But Enoch was not accessible the way another giant would have been accessible. He was not nearby. He was not part of the world the Nephilim moved through. He existed at a distance that was not only geographical, a distance of order, of standing, of the kind of access to the upper regions of understanding that the Watchers had surrendered when they descended, and that their offspring had never possessed to begin with. To reach Enoch required crossing that distance. It required a messenger, a being capable of the crossing, capable of carrying the account of the dreams from the world of the giants to the place where Enoch could be found. The tradition names the messenger Mahweh. In the surviving fragments of the Book of Giants, Mahweh appears as a figure associated with the giant world, connected to the Nephilim, but possessing a quality of movement that the account seems to distinguish from the other giant figures, a capacity for crossing, for traversing the distance between the world of the giants and the place where Enoch existed. The fragment preserves the image of Mahweh in flight, not walking, not traveling the way ordinary beings travel, across the surface of the earth, with the landscape passing beneath and the horizon shifting slowly ahead, flying, moving through a space between the worlds of the account, crossing the geography that separated the giant world from the place where the reader of their dreams was waiting. This crossing is one of the most visually striking moments in the Book of Giants tradition. And the fragment that preserves it, sitting now in the dark of a cave in this cliff face above the Dead Sea, gives us just enough of it to feel what it meant. A messenger sent by beings who could not read their own visions, carrying the images of two dreams across a distance of order, toward the one figure in the known world who possessed the framework to say what the trees meant, and what the root left in the ground was trying to tell them, and what the figures with swords descending onto the open plain were the expression of Mahweh was already moving. The cliff face holds his trajectory. The Dead Sea below this cave marks part of the landscape he crossed. The account follows him, carefully, preserving the shape of his flight the way the parchment preserves the shape of the letters pressed into it. The journey is what comes next. And at the end of the journey, an answer. An answer neither brother had been able to find by sitting with the dreams alone. An answer that would make everything clear. And in making everything clear, make everything heavier. The Dead Sea is below us right now, not metaphorically, not as a reference point in an explanation, physically below, The cliff face we have been standing on since the beginning of this account drops toward it. The water is down there in the dark, salt and still, and lower than any other body of water on the surface of the earth, sitting in its basin the way it has been sitting, since before any of this was written down, and the tradition places Mahwe's crossing here. Not in those exact words. The fragment does not say, Mahwe flew above the Dead Sea, but the geography of the Qumran world, the landscape in which these texts were preserved, the cliff face on which the jars were placed, puts the crossing of the messenger inside this landscape, makes it local, makes it specific, makes it the kind of journey that has a ground beneath it. A real ground, salt and stone, and the smell of mineral water rising from far below, Mahwe lifted from the earth. The fragment preserves this moment with the particular care the tradition gives to boundary crossings, because this is what Mahwe's flight represents. Not simply physical movement from one location to another, but a crossing between orders, the giant world below, the place where Enoch existed, above or beyond, or at a remove from the ordinary landscape, and Mahwe moving between them, carrying the weight of two unreadable dreams in whatever a messenger carries things, crossing the space that the watchers had once descended through, but in the opposite direction, upward. That reversal is worth holding. The watchers came down. Their desire moved them downward, toward what was below them, toward the daughters of men, toward the world they were not supposed to enter. Their descent is where everything in this account begins. And now, generations later, a being from the world that descent produced is moving upward, not in triumph, not in the confident, transgressive way the watchers descended, in need, carrying questions he cannot answer, carrying the images of dreams that two of the most powerful beings in the world could not read. Moving toward the one figure who might be able to say what the visions meant. Not because Mahwe possessed that understanding himself, but because he knew where it lived. The fragment describes his flight, not in complete detail. The text is fragmentary here as it is elsewhere, broken at the edges, missing in places. But what remains is enough to feel the crossing. He moved above the landscape. Below him, the earth of the pre-flood world, still, wide, still bearing the evidence of what had been done to it. Still saturated with the history of everything the Nephilim and the Watchers and the violence of the educated age had put into it, the rivers still running, the mountains still holding their shape, the settlements of the human world still visible from above. Small, fragile, already changed beyond recognition from what they had been before the descent. And the Dead Sea below, or whatever the tradition's geography placed in this position, the deep water, the salt basin, the lowest point, passing beneath Mahwe as he crossed. There is something in the image of a messenger flying above the lowest water on earth, carrying the dreams of giants toward the one person who could read them. Something about the extremes of it, the lowest place on the surface of the earth below, the highest order of understanding ahead, and between them, a crossing made necessary by the fact that the beings who produced the dreams could not themselves make the journey, could not reach what they needed to reach, could not cross the distance between their world and the place where the answer lived. Only Maway could make this crossing, and the account follows him. Enoch, in the tradition the Book of Giants belongs to, exists at a specific kind of remove from the ordinary world. The Ethiopian Orthodox canon preserves First Enoch in full, and in that text, Enoch is taken on journeys through the heavenly chambers, shown the foundations of the earth and the movements of the stars, and the places where judgment is prepared, given access to the architecture of creation in a way that no other figure in the tradition receives so completely. He is shown the watchers of heaven in their proper stations. He is shown what transgression looks like from above. He is shown the places prepared for those who broke the order they were given, and he is given the language to speak about all of it. The Giz text preserves this access with a care that reflects how seriously the Ethiopian scribes understood what they were copying. Enoch does not simply know things. He has been placed where the knowing lives. He has been given residency in the chambers of understanding that the watchers abandoned when they chose to descend, which means he can read what they could no longer read. He can interpret what their offspring were given in dreams because he has stood in the place from which the dreams were sent. Ma-Wei found him. The fragment does not give us a detailed geography of Enoch's location. It gives us the arrival, the moment when the messenger reached the place where the one who could answer was waiting. And in the tradition, Enoch does not seem surprised. That detail carries weight. A man who has been shown the foundations of the earth and the movements of heaven and the architecture of judgment, Ohyah and Hahyah, is not surprised when a messenger from the giant world arrives asking for interpretation, because Enoch already knows what the dreams mean. He has seen what they are describing from the other side. He has been in the chambers where the decision was made that the dreams were announcing. He has stood in the vision accounts of First Enoch before the same authority that sent the figures into Ohyah's garden and descended onto the open plain in Hahyah's vision. He knows the trees. He knows the figures. He knows the root left in the ground. He knows the swords and the open plain, and the earth receiving what fell. He knows all of it. Because he has seen the source of all of it, Maway delivered the account. The fragment preserves this moment carefully. He told Enoch what Ohyah had dreamed: the garden, the 2 trees, the figures arriving, the instruments raised, the first tree falling, roots exposed. The second tree falling, the single root left connected to the soil. He told Enoch what Hahyah had dreamed: the open plain, the figures descending from above, the swords, the earth receiving, the stillness after. Enoch listened, not the way you listen when you are hearing something for the first time. The way you listen when you are hearing the description of something you have already seen from a different angle. Recognizing the images as the receiver of the message, recognizes words written in a language they know fluently, understanding immediately not only what is being said, but what it means, and what it requires, and what the ones who sent the messenger are going to have to be told. He listened to the full account, and then he was still for a moment, not uncertain, not searching for the interpretation, simply holding the weight of what delivering this answer would mean, because the interpretation was not comfortable. The surviving route was not a consolation for the giants. The figures with swords were not a warning that could be heeded in time. The dreams were not the kind of visions that end with, "And here is what you must do to prevent what you have seen." They were the kind of visions that end with, "Here is what is coming. Here is what has already been decided. Here is what the dreams were sent to tell you." Not so that you could change it, but so that you would know, so that when it arrived, there would be no confusion about what it was, no mistaking the judgment for anything other than what it was. Enoch prepared his answer, and the account, which has followed Mahweh across the landscape and above the deep water and into the presence of the one reader in the known world, now turns back toward the two brothers, toward the cold ground and the pre-flood sky and the dreams still sitting unread inside them, waiting for what the messenger was carrying home. Mahweh returned across whatever distance the crossing required. Above whatever landscape the flight carried him over, back through the space between the order where Enoch existed and the world where two brothers were still sitting with unread dreams inside them. He landed, and they were waiting. The fragment does not tell us how long the crossing took. It does not measure the duration of Mahweh's absence in days or seasons, or the movement of the stars across the pre-flood sky. What it preserves is the return, the arrival of the messenger, the delivery of what he was carrying. And Ohyah and Hahyah, who had been sitting with the images of their dreams since the gray pre-dawn of the morning after the night they received them, heard Enoch's answer. Let me give it to you the way the tradition gives it, not in summary, not in the shortened form that most modern retellings use when they mention the Book of Giants at all, carefully dodged by image. The way interpretation should be given when the thing being interpreted carries the weight that these dreams carry. The garden, Enoch said, is the world, not a specific cultivated space in a specific location. The world itself, the created order, the place that was made with intention and shaped with care, and given boundaries not to confine it, but to define it, to make it what it was supposed to be. A garden is not wilderness. A garden is a place where something was decided about what would grow here and what would not, where the arrangement of things reflects the intention of whoever made the arrangement. The world, before the descent of the Watchers, was that kind of place. Ordered, bounded, tended the two trees, Enoch said, are the Watchers and their offspring. That interpretation lands differently, depending on whether you have been sitting with the image for a long time, or hearing it for the first time. For Ohyah, who had been carrying the dream since the morning, who had turned the image of the two trees over and over in his mind, without finding an entry point. The identification of the trees as the Watchers and the Nephilim must have arrived with the particular force of a thing that was always true, but could not be seen until it was named. The trees were rooted in the garden. The Watchers had been placed in the created order, given a station, given a role. Rooted in the sense that their existence was part of the structure of what was made, and they had grown. Their canopies had spread. Their branches had reached toward each other until it was difficult to tell, from a distance, where one ended and the other began, the Watchers and their offspring. 2 generations of transgression, 2 layers of the same root system, the choice that the Watchers made above, and the beings that choice produced below. The figures who arrived in the garden, Enoch said, are the ones who have been sent. The account does not name them precisely in the surviving fragment, but the Enochic tradition is consistent on this point. The ones sent to execute judgment in the tradition are not human. They are not arbitrary. They are the expression of a decision made in the chambers that Enoch had been shown. They arrive with authority because they carry authority. They move with purpose because their purpose was given to them from a place where purpose originates. They were not sent in anger. This is one of the details the interpretation seems to carry, even where the fragment is not explicit. Anger is the emotion of something that did not expect what happened. Anger rises when a boundary is crossed, and the one who set the boundary is surprised by the crossing. But the tradition preserves a different quality in the judgment that descends on the giant world. Not surprise, not anger, grief, perhaps, or something older and quieter than grief. The sadness of a decision that was always going to be necessary. From the moment the Watchers made the choice they made, the figures arrived because they had to arrive, because the garden had become something that could not continue as it was, because the trees had grown into the kind of presence that was consuming the cultivated space around them, because the world was crying out. And creation, when it cries out, is heard. The fall of the first tree, Enoch said, is the judgment on the Watchers, the beings who descended, who crossed the boundary, who took wives from among the daughters of men, who taught what was not supposed to be taught, who made the world into the place that required a flood to answer it. The roots exposed, the underground architecture of their transgression made visible, the whole history of the choice that brought them down, now turned upward toward the sky that they had left, the crown on the ground, the height they had possessed, the order they had belonged to, resting on the earth they had chosen over it. The fall of the second tree, Enoch said, is the judgment on the offspring, on the Nephilim, on Ohyah and Hahyah and all the others, on the beings whose existence was the consequence of the Watcher's choice, who had nonetheless participated in the violence, who had nonetheless consumed and destroyed and educated the world in its own ruin. The second tree falls like the first, with the same instruments, with the same authority, with the same cold purposefulness that has governed every action of the figures since they arrived in the garden. And then, the root. The single root left in the ground. This is where Enoch's interpretation reaches its most important point. The root that remains, he said, is the remnant, the one thread of the human world that the judgment was designed to preserve. The one line that would carry creation forward through the flood and into the world that would come after it. Noah, not named in the fragment as it survives, but present in the tradition with complete clarity. The root left in the ground is what Noah represented. The part of the world that the judgment was protecting by removing what had made it unbearable. And here is the detail of the interpretation that carries the most weight tonight. The root was left deliberately, not forgotten, not overlooked by figures who were focused on the larger task of bringing the trees down, deliberately left. The decision to preserve the root was made in the same place as the decision to send the figures, in the same chamber, by the same authority, at the same moment. The judgment and the preservation were not separate acts. They were one act with two expressions. The cutting down was the preservation. The removal of the trees was what made it possible for the root to remain. That is the hardest part of the interpretation for the giants to receive, because it means the judgment was not a failure of mercy. It was the form mercy took in a world that had been made so violent that mercy could only reach what needed to survive by removing what was consuming it. Ohyah received this. The fragment records his reception of the interpretation with a quietness that is itself significant. There is no argument preserved, no challenge to Enoch's reading, no attempt to find an alternative meaning that would place the giants in a different position. Only the quietness of a being that has finally been given the key to something it has been carrying since before the dawn. And, in the receiving of the key, understanding that the lock it opens was never going to open into something comfortable. Ohyah received it too. His dream, the open plain, the figures descending from above, the swords, the earth receiving, now fully readable. The open plain was the world, without the protective cover of anything standing between the giants and the judgment. The figures descending were the same figures that arrived in his brother's dream, seen from a different angle. From the perspective of the one on the ground rather than the one watching from the side, the swords were the instruments of removal seen in their most direct form. Not metaphorical cutting of roots, the direct address of the judgment to the body of the thing being judged, and the earth receiving the detail that had stayed with Ohyah most since waking. The image of the ground, accepting what fell without protest, was the tradition's confirmation that the earth which had cried out would also be the earth that received the answer to its crying. The same ground, the same witness, the testimony and the resolution happening in the same place. The brothers sat with this, the full interpretation now in their possession, the dreams finally readable, the images finally opened, and the record goes quiet here. The fragment does not give us what they said to each other after Maweh delivered Enoch's answer. It does not preserve the words that passed between two beings who had just been told, clearly, specifically, without ambiguity, that the world they inhabited was ending, that the judgment was already in motion, that the figures were already appointed, that the garden was already being entered. The fragment simply continues, moves forward into what comes after, as though the silence between the brothers after the interpretation was delivered belongs to them, not to the account, not to the record, not to the parchment preserved in the jar on the shelf in this cave. To them, two brothers on cold ground, under a sky that did not know it was about to become the vehicle of the thing the dreams had described. Holding a truth that had arrived through sleep, crossed a distance through a messenger, been given back by the one reader in the world who possessed the language for it, and now sat, finally open, finally readable, inside them. The record goes quiet, and we move with it into the silence before the account continues. The fragment in this cave survived because someone sealed it in clay. That is the immediate answer to the question of how it lasted 2,000 years. A jar, a shelf of rock, a cave in a cliff face above the Dead Sea. The particular combination of dry air and darkness and stone that preserves organic material the way nothing else preserves it. But that is only the physical answer. The deeper answer. The answer that explains not just how the text survived, but why anyone thought it worth preserving at all, requires a different kind of looking. It requires looking at what happened to the Enochic tradition after Qumran, after the jars were sealed, after the community that produced them was dispersed, after the scrolls sat undiscovered in the dark for 2 millennia, while the world above them changed in ways the scribes who sealed them could not have imagined. What happened to the tradition those scrolls belonged to? Where did it go? The answer, and it is one of the most significant facts in the history of sacred literature, is that it went to Ethiopia, not entirely, not in every form. The Book of Giants, as we have it, survived in the Aramaic fragments here at Qumran, and in later adapted versions in other traditions. It was not preserved in complete Ethiopic form, the way First Enoch was preserved, but the world that made the Book of Giants possible, the Enochic tradition, the body of literature and sacred memory that placed the Watchers and their offspring, and the pre-flood judgment at the center of its understanding of creation, that world survived most completely in Ge'ez, in the language of the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church, in the manuscripts copied by hand in monasteries on islands in Lake Tana, in Highland scriptoria in Gondar and Lalibela, in the rock-hewn churches carved directly into the mountains of the Ethiopian plateau, where the walls hold paintings and the shelves hold manuscripts, and the air carries the smell of incense and old parchment, and the particular solemnity of a tradition that has been praying in the same language for 1,500 years without interruption. First Enoch survived in complete form only in Ge'ez, That fact deserves to be held for a moment before we continue, not as a footnote, not as a bibliographic detail, as the extraordinary thing it is, a text that belonged to the Second Temple world, that was copied at Qumran alongside the Book of Giants and the Dead Sea Scrolls, that circulated among Jewish communities in the centuries before and after the Common Era, that was known to the earliest Christian writers and quoted in the New Testament letter of Jude, disappeared from almost every branch of Christianity and Judaism by the 4th and 5th centuries. Almost every branch, not the Ethiopian branch. The Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church kept it, not by accident, not by forgetting to remove it, by decision, by the considered, deliberate, theologically grounded decision of a church that looked at First Enoch and said, "This belongs inside the canon. This is scripture. This is worthy of being copied, preserved, chanted, studied, and handed down to every generation that comes after us." That decision was made in the context of a church that was already old when most Western Christian institutions were still forming. The Ethiopian Orthodox tradition traces its roots to the 4th century, to the conversion of the Aksumite Empire under King Ezana, to the work of Frumentius of Tyre, who brought the faith to the Ethiopian highlands and became the first bishop of the church that would preserve, among other things, the complete text of First Enoch in Ge'ez. But the decision to include First Enoch in the canon was not simply a 4th century choice. It reflected a continuity of reading that had been present in Ethiopian Christian practice from the beginning, a continuity that kept the Enochic tradition alive and central, while other traditions were narrowing their canons around it. The Council of Carthage in 397 AD established what most Western Christians would come to know as the biblical canon. First Enoch was not on that list. The Ethiopian Church was not bound by that council in the same way. Its canon remained broader. Its scriptural memory remained wider. Its manuscript tradition continued to carry what other traditions had decided to set aside. And among what it carried, alongside First Enoch, alongside the Book of Jubilees in its complete Ge'ez form, alongside a wider body of texts that the Western canon reduced to footnotes, was the memory of the Watchers, the memory of the Nephilim, the memory of the pre-flood world, and what filled it and why the flood was the answer it was. The memory that makes the two dreams of Ohyah and Hahyah intelligible, because you cannot fully understand what the giants dreamed without the tradition that kept their context alive, without the Ge'ez text of First Enoch explaining who the Watchers were and what they chose and what their offspring became, without the Ge'ez text of Jubilees explaining why Noah spoke to his sons with such urgency after the flood, without the Ethiopian canon preserving the moral landscape that the Book of Giants was written inside. Strip away that landscape, and the two dreams become curiosities, strange fragments from an obscure Aramaic text found in a cave, interesting to scholars, inaccessible to anyone else. Restore the landscape, the Enochic tradition preserved in Ge'ez. The complete canon maintained by the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church across 15 centuries of continuous use, and the two dreams become what they were always meant to be: mosts given to specific recipients, requiring specific interpretation, carrying the weight of a judgment that was already in motion when the dreams arrived. The G's scribes who copied First Enoch understood this. They were not copying a text they found interesting. They were copying a text they found necessary. In the dim rooms of the highland monasteries, with reed pens on parchment stretched from the skin of animals, in the lamplight that moved slightly when someone passed the doorway, they copied the account of the watchers descending, the Nephilim being born, the violence spreading, the earth crying out, the judgment coming. They copied it the way you copy something you believe is true, with attention to every word, with the understanding that what you are doing is not transcription, not the mechanical transfer of marks from one surface to another, but preservation, the act of keeping something alive, of refusing to let it become silent, of handing it forward to the next scribe, the next reader, the next generation, intact, the word in Ge'ez for a book, meshaf, because carries the meaning of a written witness, something worthy to be borne forward, something that deserves to be carried rather than left behind. That is what the Ethiopian scribes did with the Enochic tradition. They bore it forward through the collapse of the Aksumite Empire, through the medieval period when the Ethiopian highlands were largely cut off from the rest of the Christian world, through centuries of internal upheaval and external pressure, and the long difficult history of a church maintaining its identity against forces that would have simplified it. They bore it forward. And because they did, we can stand in this cave tonight, holding an Aramaic fragment that most of the world had forgotten, and place it inside the tradition that kept its context alive. We can read the two dreams of Ohyah and Hahyah and understand what the trees meant and what the root left in the ground was saying, and what the figures descending with swords were the expression of, because the Ethiopian Orthodox Church kept the framework without which the dreams are only images. That is not a small thing. It is one of the great acts of textual faithfulness in the history of sacred literature. A church in a highland landscape far from the centers of Christian theological controversy, deciding to keep what others were setting aside, not out of stubbornness, not out of ignorance of what the other traditions were doing, out of the conviction that what had been given to them was worth keeping. That conviction is still visible in the manuscripts, in the careful hand of the scribe who did not rush, in the even spacing of the G's letters, in the marginal notes that record where a reader paused, in the binding that held the pages together through weather and war and the long patience of centuries. The tradition kept the dreams alive. And tonight, in this cave, with the Dead Sea below and the Aramaic fragment in the account, and the Ge'ez text of First Enoch standing behind it like the wall that makes a shelter possible, we can hear them, both of them, the garden and the plain, the trees and the swords, the falling and the root left in the ground, still speaking, still carrying what they were sent to carry, still waiting for the reader who will take them seriously enough to remain in them long enough to feel what they were always meant to feel. There is one more detail in the fragment that has not yet been named. One specific line, preserved in the Aramaic, that most readings of the Book of Giants pass over quickly, a line not about the dreams themselves, not about the interpretation, not about the judgment or the flood or the root in the ground, a line about what the giants felt. After they finally understood what the dreams had said, that line is what comes next. There is a line in this fragment that most people never reach, not because it is hidden deep in the text, not because it requires unusual scholarly access to find, because most readings of the Book of Giants stop before they arrive at it. They stop at the dreams. They stop at the interpretation. They stop at the theological significance of the surviving root and the identity of the figures with swords and the meaning of the garden in the Enochic framework. All of that is important. All of that deserves the attention it receives. But the line that comes after, the line that records what happened inside the giants when Enoch's answer finally reached them, that line is the one that has stayed with me longest. It is the line the tradition preserved almost quietly, without emphasis, without the kind of textual framing that signals to a reader, "Pay attention here. This matters. Do not move past this quickly." It is simply there, in the Aramaic, on the parchment, waiting for the reader who will slow down enough to feel what it is carrying. The line records fear, not rage, not defiance, not the response you might expect from beings whose entire existence had been characterized by power and appetite, and the consumption of everything that stood in their way. Fear, the Aramaic text, in the fragments that preserve this moment, uses language that scholars have translated with careful attention to its specific weight. The giants were frightened. Some translations carry the sense of being seized, of a fear that arrives not gradually, not as a growing unease that builds over time, but suddenly, all at once, the way a physical thing seizes you, the way cold water seizes the body when you enter it unexpectedly. Taking the breath before the mind has caught up to what is happening, that quality of seizure is important, because it tells you something about how the interpretation arrived in them. They had been carrying the dreams for the duration of Maway's crossing and return. They had been sitting with the images, turning them over, pressing them for meaning without finding any, living inside the particular discomfort of possessing something important that you cannot read. And then the interpretation came, and the relief of understanding, the release of finally having the key, lasted exactly as long as it took to comprehend what the key had opened, which was not long. Because what the key opened was not a room that offered comfort. It was a room that confirmed everything the dreams had seemed to be saying, but that the uninterpreted mind had perhaps been hoping somewhere beneath the conscious carrying of the images was not quite as final as it felt. Enoch's interpretation removed that hope, not cruelly, not with the satisfaction of a judge delivering a verdict he has been looking forward to pronouncing. Simply by being accurate, the trees were the watchers and their offspring. The figures were appointed. The judgment was already in motion. The root left in the ground was not the giants. That last detail, the confirmation that the surviving root was not them, is where the fear would have arrived with its full weight, because as long as the root was unidentified, as long as the interpretation had not yet been given, there was the possibility, however faint, however unlikely, that the surviving root meant something that included them, that the one root left in the ground was a detail in their favor, a sign of exception, a place in the vision where the judgment paused and something of their world was preserved. Enoch's answer closed that possibility. The root was the human line. The root was what would survive the flood. The root was what the judgment was designed to protect, not them. And in the moment that became clear, the fear arrived. The fragment preserves this. The word used in the Aramaic carries layers that a single English translation cannot fully hold. It is not only the fear of physical danger, not only the animal response of a body that has registered threat. It carries the sense of a fear that involves understanding a fear that is inseparable from the comprehension that produced it. The giants were not afraid of the dark. They were not afraid of pain in the way that creatures afraid of pain are afraid. These were beings who had inflicted more pain than most of the world could contain. What seized them was the fear of a specific truth, clearly understood. Impossible to misread now that the interpretation had been given, landing in them with the full weight of a thing that cannot be undone. The judgment was not a possibility. It was not a warning that could be heeded. It was not a vision of a future that their behavior could still alter if they changed direction quickly enough. It was a report from the chambers where the decision had already been made, delivered through a dream, through a messenger, through the one reader in the world who had stood in those chambers and could translate what he had seen there into language the recipients could understand. The judgment was coming, and the fear the fragment records, in that quiet Aramaic line that most readings pass over, is the fear of beings who have just understood that they are standing inside a story whose ending has already been written. There is something in this that I find almost unbearable to hold, not because the giants deserve sympathy in the ordinary sense. The account is not asking for sympathy. The tradition that preserved it understood exactly what the Nephilim were and what their existence had done to the world. But because the fear the fragment records is recognizable, it is the fear that arrives when you understand something too late, when the interpretation comes after the choices have already been made. When the meaning of the path you have been walking becomes clear only when you can see how far down it you already are. When the root in the garden turns out to belong to someone else, and the someone else is the one who will continue. and the continuation will happen after you are gone. That fear is not unique to giants. It has a human shape, and the Aramaic text, in that one quiet line, preserved it without commentary, without explanation, without the kind of framing that would tell the reader what to do with it. Just the fact of it. The giants were afraid. The world they had been moving through with such confidence, such appetite, such educated destruction, had turned out to have an ending that their power could not negotiate with, and they knew it. Now, fully, finally, without the merciful blur of the uninterpreted dream. The fragment moves forward after this line. It does not linger on the fear. It does not give the giants a speech in which they process what they have received. It does not offer them a scene of private grief or public defiance, or any of the emotional responses that a modern narrative might feel obligated to provide. It simply records the fear and continues as though the fear was the ending of one part of the account and the continuation was already underway, as though what mattered was not how the giants felt about the judgment, but that they knew about it, that they had been told, that the record shows clearly that the judgment did not arrive without announcement. The dreams came first, the messenger went. The interpretation returned, the fear arrived, and then, after all of that, the world continued toward its ending, knowing. There is a theological weight in that sequence that the Ethiopian tradition understood very well, because the God of the Enochic world, the God whose presence fills the Giz text of First Enoch, from its first chapter to its last, is not a God who acts without announcement. He is a God who sends dreams, who sends messengers, who ensures that interpretation reaches the ones it was addressed to, who makes certain that when the judgment arrives, it arrives into understanding, not into ignorance. The giants were given the dreams. They were given the means to seek interpretation. They were given the interpretation itself. They were given the fear that comes from understanding. And what they did with all of that, the account does not fully tell us, because what they did with it is the flood. The flood is the next event in the tradition. The flood is what comes after the fear, and the fragment we are holding here in this cave, above the water that the cliff face drops toward, is the record of everything that was given to the giants before that ending came. The record of two dreams, a crossing, an interpretation, a line of fear, preserved in clay, in the dark, for 2,000 years waiting to be read aloud. The jar that held this fragment was made by hand, not in a factory, not by a machine that measured the clay and shaped it with mechanical consistency and fired it at a controlled temperature. By hand, someone sat at a wheel or worked the clay without one and shaped the body of the jar with their fingers and palms, building the walls upward from the base, smoothing the surface, forming the neck narrow enough to hold a seal that would keep what was inside. Inside, that person knew what they were making it for. Not every jar made at Qumran was made for preservation. Some held water, some held food, some held the ordinary contents of an ordinary life, lived in a community on a cliff face above the Dead Sea. But some were made with a specific knowledge of what they would contain, a scroll written material. Something the community had decided was worth keeping in a form that could outlast the circumstances pressing in around them, because the community at Qumran, whatever their precise identity and theology and the full shape of their practice, understood that they were living in uncertain times, that what they had might not be able to remain where it was indefinitely, that the world beyond the cliff was moving in directions that threatened preservation, that the Roman presence in the land was not the kind of presence that leaves old libraries intact when it decides to move through. So they sealed things. They took the scrolls they had copied, and the scrolls they had received, and the fragments that belonged to traditions older than their own community, and they wrapped them, linen first. The linen wrapping is one of the details of the Qumran preservation that carries more weight than its practical function suggests. Linen was not the cheapest available material for protecting a scroll. It was not the most obvious choice if the only goal was to keep moisture away from parchment. But linen carries associations in the ancient world that the community at Qumran would have understood without needing to discuss them. It is the material of the sacred, of the priestly, of the carefully separated, the set apart, the handled with attention. When you wrap a scroll in linen before sealing it in a jar, you are not only protecting it from moisture, you are making a statement about what kind of thing it is. A thing worthy of the treatment given to sacred objects, a thing handled with the care given to what belongs to a different order than the ordinary. The Book of Giants. Fragment was wrapped in linen, then placed in the jar. The jar was sealed with a stopper, fitted carefully into the narrow neck, packed around with whatever material was available to make the seal as complete as possible, and then carried to the cave. The cave we have been standing in since the beginning of this account. The opening in the cliff face that you would walk past in daylight if you did not know it was there. The darkness inside that is older and stiller than the darkness outside. The stone shelf in the interior where the jars were placed, not dropped, not thrown in quickly under pressure of imminent danger, placed with the deliberateness of people who were taking their time because they understood that what they were doing might need to last a very long time. The shelf held them, the cave held the shelf, the cliff held the cave. The desert held the cliff with its particular gift of dry air and stable temperature, and the absence of the moisture that destroys organic material over centuries. And the darkness settled around the jars and stayed. For how long we know roughly. The scrolls were sealed sometime in the 1st century, most scholars believe. In the decades before or around the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 AD, the exact date is not recoverable from the physical evidence alone. But the range is clear enough, approximately 2,000 years. 2,000 years of darkness in a sealed jar on a stone shelf, in a cave in a cliff face above the Dead Sea. While the world above the cliff changed in ways that would have been incomprehensible to the hands that placed the jars there. Empires rose and fell. Languages died, and new ones grew in their place. The religion that had produced the community at Qumran fragmented and reformed and fragmented again across centuries of diaspora and survival. The tradition that had kept First Enoch at its center narrowed, and the Enochic literature moved to the margins, and eventually out of the canon of almost every branch of Judaism and Christianity that carried those traditions forward. And in the cave, the jars sat, undisturbed, unsealed, the linen wrapping holding its shape around the scroll inside, the clay of the jar holding its form in the dry air, the darkness around them total, unbroken. Patient in the way that darkness is patient when nothing is asking it to change. Until 1947, the account of the discovery has been told many times. A Bedouin shepherd, a thrown stone. The sound of something breaking inside a cave that should not have had anything breakable inside it. The investigation. The opening of the cave, the jars on the shelf, the scrolls inside.